What if Deku could rewrite the rules of Quirk? How would this change everything? Before we start, I want you guys to subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and also share this video with your friends. It will really mean a lot to me. You can also check other what ifs on the channel. The like aim for this video is 200. Your support keeps me motivated to bring more amazing what ifs for you guys. Now let's begin. The world is a harsh and unforgiving place. The people who inhabit it can be even harsher. To hold dreams in such a world is dangerous. To hold them out in the open infinitely more so. This is a lesson a certain Izuku Midoriya has learned many times from many different types of people. As Doctor, kid, you have a second pinky toe joint. It's very unlikely you're ever going to get a quirk. His bullies. Ha! The quirkless kid wants to be a hero, what a joke. His childhood friend. Listen nerd, I'm the only one from this school who's hero material, you got that. His mother. I'm so sorry sweetie. His idol. No. The quirkless person can't be a hero. That last one hurt the most, or at least it would when it sunk in. Right now he just felt numb. Today had been a long day for him. First he got pointed out and laughed at by the class, then his notebook got burned, then he got attacked by a villain, then got saved by Almight, then he found out Almight's secret, and then last but not least, he had his dreams torn apart in front of his very eyes. All of these had piled on top of one another until Izuku's brain just shut down and led to his current situation. Absent-mindedly drifting along the streets, relying on his feet and muscle memory to take him to his destination, which was still undecided. He couldn't let his mother see him like this, so home was a no-go, but he didn't want to think of somewhere else to go. He didn't want to do much thinking at all right now. The atmosphere wasn't doing his mood any favors either. The cloudy afternoon sky overhanging a dreary street, empty save for the occasional piece of forgotten trash. The only noise to be found was an old crow on a telephone wire, and his own thoughts. Maybe he should have listened to Kachin and just given up already. It would have saved him a lot of trouble. Hell, if he had listened he wouldn't have run into Almight in the first place. Who would have ever thought that would be considered a good thing? The green-haired student was shaken out of his thoughts by the sound of familiar explosions. Those were Kachin's explosions. He had been hit with them too many times to not know what they sounded like. Thankfully Izuku has had plenty of experience with what to do in these situations. He turned around and started walking in the opposite direction. He was quirkless, not suicidal. However, he only made it a few steps before something stopped him. Are those screams? Turning to look did nothing to assuage the pit forming in his gut either. Wisps of black smoke were creeping above the building skyline like dark skeletal fingers. Instinct carried his feet forward before freezing in place. The quirkless person can't be a hero. The words bounced around his head with the weight of a freight train. Later he told himself as he forced his legs to move, I'll deal with that later. Rain of sins. It took a while for him to get where the explosions were coming from, and the closer he got, the louder the screams and explosions became. It was only when he rounded the last corner did he realize how bad the situation really was. The crowd was surrounding the scene, only held back by a few police and a handful of pro-heroes. Intense flames burned and lapped at the surrounding buildings, and at the center of it all, Kachin. The blonde in question was in the center of the alleyway, blasting explosions in every direction and at every available opportunity. But that wasn't really anything abnormal. What was out of the ordinary was the giant sludge villain wrapped around, said mini pyromaniac. The same villain, Izuku noted with dread, that had attacked him not an hour prior. He escaped. But how? His mind was running overtime trying to think up a solution All Might had him contained in the bottles. He showed me and then put them in his pocket. His eyes widened in understanding, and his stomach tied itself into knots. It's my fault. I grabbed onto his pockets when he jumped. They must have torn open or at least been jostled enough, so the bottles fell out. He looked to the people screaming, the fires still billowing smog into the sky, and his friend fighting for his life. This is all my fault. All of this is because of me. It's my fault and I can't have anything to Hopanyo. He clamped down on his thoughts, closed his eyes, and forced himself to take a deep breath. Later. He told himself, I'll think about it later. Right now I need to focus on the situation at hand. He waited a few seconds to calm himself down before opening his eyes and observing the situation again. It's just like every other villain attack you've watched, but you need to get closer if you want to see anything useful. He told himself as he nudged his way through the crowd. He nearly had a heart attack when he saw All Might's deflated form out of the corner of his eye, before passing it off as his already worn-out mind playing tracks on him. Pushing the last few people out of the way, he finally got to the front of the crowd. 3 heroes present with Mount Lady on the way. He observed, it's okay Izuku, this is just a standard hostage situation. The pros have trained for this 1,000 times before. Just calm down. Calm down, relax, and watch how they take care of it. Except, as he watched with bated breath, they didn't. Fire is my weakness, I can't get too close. Kamui Woods yelled. You have a water hero with you. Have you never had a campfire? Where wood doesn't burn, have him blast you, then speed forward a branch arm, grab Kachin, and pull him away. Even if you can't get him entirely unstuck, he's aiming the villain, you'll be in the opposite direction he's aiming. The explosions are too intense, I can't reach them. Death Arms chimed in. Pick up one of the many large pieces of rubble surrounding you, use it as a shield to get close, and grab him. If he knows you're there to help, he won't shoot you. How dumb do you think he is? The villain's liquid, my punches wouldn't have any effect. He continued. Excuse me. Can you not see correctly? He has eyes, and those are quite obviously not liquid. Or better yet, don't go for the villain, go help Kachin, the hostage who's in danger. I can't get through, the streets are too narrow. Mount Lady proclaimed from the street over. Then shrink down, get over here, and resize. Even if you can't grow, you can still help with the crowd. We could really use some high-powered water right now. Death Arms yelled. I can't, I already have my hands full with these fires. The water hero responded. Those buildings have already been evacuated, and actual firefighters are almost here. You're not even doing anything, because Kachin is the one causing the fires. Every time you put one out, another starts. Save him instead of the empty building, stop more fires from being started, then with the help of the fire force, put the rest of the fires out. We don't have the right quirks. At least you have quirks. As the aspiring hero watched the scene unfold, he sank to his knees. He's going to die. He's going to die because no one did anything. He's going to die, and it's all my fault. Please, he begs someone, anyone please help. All might help. But as the seconds ticked by, Izuku learned something very important. Something that, looking back, he should have realized in the doctor's office all those years ago. The world doesn't give a heck about him. It doesn't care if he becomes a hero or jumps off a bridge, it'll just keep spinning as it's always done and will continue to do. Blinking away unshed tears, Izuku forced himself to look back at his friend, fighting for his life because of his mistake. Izuku pushed himself to his feet, caught himself from falling, and moved. Rain of sins. Izuku numbly trudged his way through the alleyway that led to his apartment. It wasn't the stereotypical dark alleyways from movies with drug dealers and gangs. No, these were just normal, well-lit-ish, urban alleyways, and the most dangerous people that prowled them were the occasional elementary school bully. Speaking of bullies, Izuku knew this area like the back of his hand, because he had been using it to dodge bullies that tried to chase him after school ended. Oddly enough, these alleys were one of the few places Izuku could honestly say he felt completely safe, the other being his home. Which in and of itself was ironic, considering he had been completely terrified of them when he first got chased into them by bullies back in kindergarten. Half an hour of crying and a friendly stray cat later, younger him had mustered up the courage to find his way out. Almight wouldn't be scared was the phrase that he had repeated to himself over and over, as he wandered in the vague direction of his home. And when it was all said and done, he had found a direct route from school to his apartment complex, that shaved off a good 15 minutes off walking. Almight wouldn't be scared, huh? Almight was the reason he was walking this route right now. It turns out he hadn't hallucinated Almight in the crowd, he had swooped in to save Izuku from the sludge villain, after he had rushed in like an idiot. Then immediately after that, he had to sit and be scolded by 4 different pro-heroes, for what was best summed up as being an idiot, and, even worse, being a quirkless idiot. Almight had even tried to walk over before he got swarmed by reporters, looking like he really wanted to say something. Izuku already knew what he was going to say though, so he ran away. He ran into the alleys he used to hide, but this time it wasn't from his bullies, it was from the person he looked up to the most. He ran and hid because after everything he had been through that day, he couldn't be sure he could hold himself together. You didn't listen to my advice and put yourself in needless danger. But Almight was too kind to get angry over something like that. No, he wouldn't be angry at him, and that's what made it so much worse. I'm not mad at you, I'm disappointed in myself for my failure to convince you to stay safe. Wiping away tears that threatened to spill, the green-haired boy, sore, beaten, and exhausted, continued to push himself forward. Later, he told himself, I'll deal with it all when I get home. So instead he tried to distract himself with positive thoughts. He had aced that biology pop quiz in 2nd period. He got Almight's autograph and could show it to his mom. And Kachin. Izuku couldn't help the grin that slowly spread across his face. He had done it, he had saved his friend. Even if nothing had gone to plan, he managed to be a real hero in Deku. Speak of the devil and he shall appear. Turning around, Izuku came face to face with the exact person he had been thinking about just a second prior. Leaning on the ally wall, panting, out of breath, and looking overall worse for wear, he did just almost get eaten by a giant slime after all, stood the one and only Katsuki Bakugo. Kachin. Midoriya smiled as he jogged to his friend, exhaustion forgotten. Can you believe it? I finally was able to be a hero. I was actually. The loud crack of an explosion rocked the alleyway, jostling Izuku out of his cheerful thoughts. The explosion wasn't aimed at anything, being set involuntarily by an overflow of emotion. A quick glance to Bakugo's hands, clenched so tightly they were turning white with small pops going off around them every few seconds, proved this theory. His expression as he looked up proved it a second time. Blazing red eyes accompanied by a sneer that practically used malice, did very little to lift Izuku's fast plummeting spirit. You little shit. Most words were spoken. These were spat, and dripping with anger too. How fun. Bakugo pushed himself off the wall and stood to his full height, standing over Izuku, as the poor boy tried to make himself as small as humanly possible. Being overly cheerful when Bakugo was angry, by general rule of thumb, was a bad idea. Bakugo was fuming. This whole day had just been one giant clusterfuck. First he bombed a pop quiz, then he found out that Deku of all people was trying to mock him by being the only other person to put UA on his high school recommendation paper. Then he got attacked by a hecking villain of all damn things, got held hostage, and worst of all was hecking useless the entire time. He had to play hecking damsel in distress, and sit there like a hecking sack of potatoes, while Deku of all goddamn people saved his ass. And while Almight watched too. But that's not all. No, when he saw him following him, Deku had the hecking audacity to try to run away after all that shit he just pulled. So long story short, Bakugo was pissed. Did you really try to run away from me? Why I don't. You really think you'd be able to pull that shit, make me look like a damn fool in front of All Might, and then run away from me? No? That's N not WHY. Bullshit. Katsuki's yell was accompanied by a pair of explosions. I can handle my own goddamn problems. If I get myself into a shitty situation, it's my own hecking responsibility to get myself out. But then you came in, made me look like an idiot, and then instead of facing me like a man, you hecking ran. His eyes were practically glowing red in the shadows cast by the setting sun. No? I wasn't running far from you, though. Bakugo stilled, his eyes narrowing dangerously. Then who? Izuku gulped, his answer feeling pitifully weak even as he said it. All Might. Boom. He fell to the ground. The explosion that rocked the ally, even though it wasn't aimed at him, was powerful enough to have his ears ringing. First you make a fool of me, then you run, and now you're hecking lying to my face. Bakugo was shaking at this point. Who do you think you are? Izuku only had a second to register a pair of hands gripping his collar before he was hauled to his feet. Well, I don't answer the goddamn question or I'll blow your head off. I couldn't you just watch you die? I had to do so something. Izuku stuttered, practically shaking like a leaf. So what? I got myself into that shitty situation. It's my own hecking responsibility to get myself out. No, it was my fault. Cut the bullshit. I don't need your hecking pity. Bakugo pushed Izuku away, the green-eyed boy managing to catch himself before he fell. Absent-mindedly, he noted that his shirt's collar was burnt and lightly smoking. Pie pity? No. I was helping you out, a friend in need. For 5-10 seconds, the ally was completely quiet. No yelling, no explosions, not even any wind, just pure silence. This is such hecking bullshit. The tension that had filled the alley disappeared not with an explosion, but with an exhausted sigh as Bakugo stuffed his hands in his pockets and turned around to walk away. Wah, don't play dumb with me, nerd. Friend. I'm not your friend. You've always looked down on me, ever since we were little. No matter how hard I worked to get to the top, you always acted like I needed help, always thought I couldn't handle anything by myself, always mocked me. One day I'll be just as strong as you, catching. You were quirkless, useless in a fight, I was on the top. And after constant practicing, after training till I dropped day in and day out to get to that spot, you, a scrawny nobody who hadn't put a day into training, hadn't gone to the gym even once, acted as though I was still on your level. At the very bottom. And no matter how many times I pushed you down to prove that all my effort had paid off, you continued to come back. I don't want your friendship. I don't want your pity. He paused mid-step and Izuku's hope formally smashed, soared, and quit with the catching thing. It pisses me off. Only to be smashed down once again. And he walked away. Just like that. Izuku stood in the alley for a while, just staring off into space, his mind trying to sort through everything. He stood in the alley for a bit longer. Then just a bit longer. Then a little longer still, until he could form a coherent thought. Later. I'll deal with everything later, when I get home. And so the green-haired hero Admirer turned and walked towards his house, the opposite direction of where Bakugo went. Both of the students had been shaken by the conversation. As one-sided as it was, it had been the first real conversation between the two in years. Unfortunately, as bright and flashy as it was, none of the really important things that really needed to be said were spoken of in any detail. And while neither of them knew it yet, that lack of communication in this conversation would come to cause many things to happen later down the line, many regrettable things. And as a pebble kicked off a ledge turned into a landslide, this too was perhaps the most regrettable mistake of all, because it was the only avoidable one. Bane of sins, a certain deflated number 1 hero walked through the streets, his time limit having expired almost an hour ago, and his sense of direction failing him horribly. The kid was standing right in front of me. How did I manage to lose him? He had managed to take about 5 or so steps before he got flocked by reporters, and by the time he got away from them the kid was long gone. The symbol of peace had tried to track after him. He had tracked down many dangerous villains in his time as a hero. What was the difference? The difference was that the child was apparently far more capable than the supposed top villains, having not only spotted the pro, but given him the slip multiple times before finally managing to lose him. After 20 minutes of chasing dead ends, Toshinori had attempted to ask to see if anyone else had seen where the boy ran. Unfortunately, he hadn't taken his appearance into account. A tall, gangly man in his 40s, asking around for the whereabouts of a teenage student who he wasn't related to, didn't know the name of, and who was currently running from him. Not his best moment. He cringed as his phone rang, silently cursing when he saw the time. He had a scheduled meeting half an hour ago, about him teaching at UA, with Principal Nezu, who was currently calling him. He could only sigh as he accepted the call. Even though he was quirkless, the boy had had an incredible drive to be a hero. So strong that, even though he almost certainly wouldn't pass, Toshinori knew he would attempt the UA entrance exam anyway. He would be able to find the boy then, at the exam, and make him his successor. No? The quirkless person can't become a hero. He would attempt anyway, right? Nana would be so disappointed in him. Vainest sins. Izuku laid in bed, staring at the ceiling. It was well past sunset, but he was still wide awake. He was too busy unpacking the day's events to be tired, but it was just so much. Bombshell after metaphorical bombshell had been dropped on the poor teen, so you had to forgive him for being a bit stressed. Said stress had bled over into other things, like his attitude towards the pros at the rescue scene. His thoughts had been jaded and a bit cold, and while they were all technically right, that didn't mean they were deserved. Or his conversation with Kachin, he stuttered normally, but it wasn't usually that bad. He could barely get out a single word for heaven's sake. And Kachin had. No? He swallowed. Not Kachin, he had made it very clear how much he hated that name. I don't want your friendship. Deep breath, he told himself. Of course he wasn't my friend. The evidence had been there in spades. I had just been too stupid to realize it. He wiped at the tears, born of stress and emotional overflow, that were threatening to stream down his face. He's basically the school celebrity, while I'm the bullied loner. It doesn't matter that I have the best scores in our grade, our teachers still constantly pamper him while making things as hard as possible for me. He has an incredible quirk while I'm just a quirkless nobody. His quirk put him on the top of the world since the moment he first got it, while my lack of one. He rolled over, desperately trying to get away from that train of thought, only to find himself face to face with one of his Almight posters. No? The quirkless person can't become a hero. The words echoed around his head with the force of a freight train, and the only thing that came to Izuku's mind was why. Why does everything come back to me being quirkless? The quirkless person isn't favored as much as someone with a powerful quirk. The quirkless person can't be a hero. The quirkless person gets scolded for running to help, while Bakugo gets unbridled praise. It all comes back to quirks. Every damn time. Everything is about quirks. Quirks run our society. Quirks are, wait, Izuku blinked. What exactly is a quirk? The question, blunt as it was, brought his mind to a screeching halt. Scrambling for an answer to such a simple question, his mind turned to his classes. Quirks are genetic mutation in the human genome that allow for the use of incredible powers. He muttered to himself. These mutations can be passed down genetically, and first appeared over 200 years ago. The first known case was a light quirk. Simple question, simple answer, straight out of the textbook. Except, that didn't really answer the question, did it? Quirks were mutation to human DNA, but what type of mutation allows its user to do things like spontaneously grow taller than a building? What about mutation-type quirks? Having a tail or wings might make sense if you stretch science, but how did human DNA suddenly start mimicking lizard DNA so closely as to allow a person to share almost every trait with the animals, all the way down to behavior patterns? Speaking of animals, Principal Nezu of UA was an animal who had a quirk, so quirks weren't just exclusive to humans. Izuku pushed himself to sit upright as his brain tried to comprehend how his simple question had turned into a labyrinth of mysteries. Now that he was thinking about it, every history book he had ever read claimed quirks just appeared one day and became more common as time went on, and left it at that. But why? Every quirk biology book claimed quirks were the ultimate form of evolution, but that didn't make any sense. The theory of natural selection takes place over hundreds of generations, taking millions of years to make any major noticeable difference. Quirks, meanwhile, appeared seemingly overnight. And even if that was the case, how did it explain quirks that were based on human technology? The hero Ingenium was a great example of this. His mutation-type quirk manifested as engines in his elbows. That's mechanical machinery, it doesn't have DNA. Izuku stepped off his bed, made his way over to his school bag, and fumbled around in the dark for a few seconds, before he managed to successfully pull out his biology book. He set it on his desk, turned on his table lamp, and started flipping through the pages, hoping to find an explanation to his increasingly complex query. What could possibly cause such an extreme shift almost overnight to not just the human population's DNA, but the animal populations as well? Some claimed that quirks had always been around, saying the witches and their magic that were burned back in medieval times were just people who had quirks, but that explanation fell short too. If they actually did have quirks, they would have been passed on to their children, and what was the possibility that every quirk manifested before 200 years ago was an emitter quirk? Ancient mythical creatures like mermaids and minotaurs maybe could be explained as mutation-type quirks, but again neither of those theories explains the sudden boom in quirks almost 200 years ago. He finally arrived at the section on quirks, only to find a half-page paragraph. That can't be right. He thought while re-scanning the page. There has to be more. But there wasn't any more. Just a singular paragraph that, after reading through it, barely contained any information at all. Most of it was just the author bragging about his other works. Meanwhile, the actual information provided could be best summed up as quirks appeared, so now we have them. The book was closed with gritted teeth and tossed back in the general vicinity of where his bag was. The aspiring hero turned off his lamp and booted up his computer, the same computer he watched Almight's video on every day as a kid. A quick click and his browser popped up. Decluttered was his first thought upon seeing the multitude of open tabs left over from his previous uses, ranging from online games, hero news boards, and school research assignments. Normally he would be more than capable of sorting through them all, but he was already exhausted from the previous disaster of the day, and now with this rabbit hole of a question eating at his mind, he just really didn't want to spare the mental effort. So with a few more clicks, he had closed all the excess tabs, and was on a blank search page. The screen was completely white save for a search bar and the company logo. Just a few keystrokes and he'd be done, then he could go back to bed. Go to bed and finish thinking about everything that happened. But first he needed an answer. You see, the funny thing about life is that, for all the incredible things that people do, the things that end up changing the world the most are almost always done on complete accident. In his clearing of tabs, the young man who in another life would have become Almight's successor not half a day prior, had closed a tab he first opened nearly over a decade ago, and hadn't closed since. A tab with a very certain video that had inspired him to become a hero all those years ago, a tab that, like a door of destiny, had been closed to make room for a question. As the clock struck midnight, Izuku took a deep breath and typed out his question. What is a quirk? And outside his window, a butterfly flapped its wings. Krugery had been having a good day, he really had. The sun was shining, the next episode of his favorite TV show came out, no fights had broken out in the bar, and he had even gotten an abnormally high tip from one of his regulars, not that he really needed it. It had just been an all-round good day. So of course it had to go horribly wrong. Let it be known, Krugery liked his bar quite a bit. It was his work, his hobby, his passion, and his house all in one, with the first story being the bar, the second being guest rooms, and the third his own private suite. His bar was his own little place in the world, and over time it had become something of a staple in the criminal underworld. It was a place where everyone could come, enjoy a nice drink, play a game of darts, and just relax and unwind, far away from the hardships of life. Mobsters, gangs, murderers, thieves, anyone and everyone was welcome, as long as they didn't disturb the peace his bar offered, not that anyone ever did. His bar was full of the type of people who you really wouldn't want to run into in an alleyway, and these people were more than happy to, let's say escort, any troublemakers away from their leisure spot. So you would think that with a small army of thugs, mercenaries, and killers, no one would be dumb enough to barge in and try to take over his bar. Except of course, someone was. And even worse than that, they somehow succeeded. The Quirk user placed the glass he had been polishing back in its freshly cleaned cabinet, and took a glance at the bar's only other current occupant, Tomura Shigaraki. The light blue-haired man had barged into his bar covered in hands, and flanked by 10 black armored men. He had brazenly declared the bar was now under his ownership, and that all the customers needed to get out. What happened next was predictable. Everyone laughed at him, and the biggest guy in the room, a friendly mercenary everyone nicknamed Big Bob, had gotten up to throw him and his lackeys out. They quickly stopped laughing after Tomura turned Bob, the man who had been gushing over how he was going to be an uncle not a minute beforehand, into a pile of dust. That's when it all went to shit. His customers all jumped to their feet and pulled out a myriad of weapons, knives, pistols, crowbars, etc., and rushed to avenge their friend. The armored men pulled out rifles, and Tomura dashed forward. A minute and a half later and his beloved bar was covered in layers of blood and dust, his customers all either dead or fled. On the bright side of things, 6 of the 10 men Tomura had brought were dead, with another seriously injured. Krugery could thank David for that. His very first customer and most active regular had drawn his revolver, a gift from his grandfather. He would often brag, the moment Tomura opened his mouth, and managed to take 3 of the bodyguards down on top of putting a bullet to Tomura's shoulder before being dusted. After the gruesome spectacle, Tomura had sat down at the bar to nurse his shoulder, close enough to grab the warper if he tried to use his quirk, and the remaining bodyguards had brought in and hooked up what appeared to be a vintage TV. The men had then picked up their fallen comrades and left. Before Krugery could say anything though, the TV flickered on. On the screen a masked man had appeared. He introduced himself as Tomura's teacher, giving a name to the red-eyed man who had done nothing but glare at the bartender since he sat down. Oh, how Krugery was so sorry for Tomura getting shot in the shoulder. It's not like the idiot had decided to take on an entire bar full of pissed-off thugs and mafia members, with only 10 men as backup. His teacher had gone on to clarify a few things. He explained that those were his men, that he had a lot more of them, and that Krugery was to listen to Tomura's orders from now on. When he had questioned as to why he should listen to the man who had killed his entire customer base not 5 minutes prior, the TV man simply laughed and calmly proceeded to give a very vivid description of what would happen to him if he failed to comply. Now Krugery was a reasonable man, and while he could firmly say that he had no qualms with tweaking his daily routine for the foreseeable future, in order to not get killed, he was still under the opinion that he should have had at least 5 minutes to gather his thoughts on everything, before being hauled off to have his quirk examined by a doctor named Izuku. The doctor, mind you, who had lost his license a few years back. After only a few minutes with the man, Krugery could honestly say he understood why he had lost it. To put it simply, the doctor was he sounded like a mad scientist out of some fantasy book. Your quirk is far too fascinating to not research. The man had explained, if I can find out how it works, it will bring me one step closer to creating the perfect masterpiece for my master. What Krugery found the oddest about the man wasn't the way he worshipped his master, but instead his willingness to answer all of Krugery's questions. He loved to go on and on about the artwork that his research allowed him to gift his master, and how he hoped to one day create the perfect masterpiece. The doctor had then gone on to inform him that Tomura was the man's successor, and how powerful this all-for-one was in physical strength, as well as political influence, and sheer cunning. Terrifying the mismade man to the core in the process. After all the tests were done with and all his questions were answered, the ones he had been willing to ask at least, Krugery was allowed to return home. Well, perhaps allowed to go home was too kind of phrasing. One of the doctor's assistants had broken something, and Krugery had been kicked out so the mad scientist could yell at them. As he walked back to his bar, far too mentally exhausted to use his quirk, he realized something. The doctor, obsessed with his work and slightly off-kilter he may be, was actually the nicest person he had met that day. He hadn't killed his customers, pointed a gun at him, or threatened to string him up by his intestines. If that didn't say how bad his day had been, he didn't know what would. Krugery let out a sigh and could only hope that someone out there was having a better day than he was. Bane of sins, Izuku was not having a good day. 3.5 weeks had passed since he first asked his question, and he hadn't found anything. Websites were just as bad as his biology book had been, vague at best, and purposely misleading at worst. Social media and hero threads had proved to be even more useless, the results ranging from people brushing his question off and telling him to not worry about it, to openly laughing at him. A week in and he had finally gotten fed up enough to start messaging actual doctors about it, but that plan of action had lost its footing almost as quickly as it had gained it, with most not bothering to respond, and the few that actually took him seriously climbing up when they realized he didn't have a quirk. He had emailed college professors, scientists, and head directors of several research labs. His sheer number of emails sent guaranteeing him at least a few replies, only to meet the same result. They didn't take him seriously because he was quirkless. His latest reply from a doctor of St. Luke's International Hospital seemed to sum up all their thought processes. Why bother with wanting to learn about quirks? You don't have one and aren't going to develop one. The only thing I can think of is that you want to see if there's a way to give you one. If this is the case, and I highly suspect it is, then I'm going to have to ask you to stop wasting important people's time with your childish fantasies. Izuku gave out a tired sigh and sunk into his textbook. Finding a way to gain a quirk would be wonderful, it really would, but that wasn't even what he was asking. He just wanted to know what a quirk even was. At this point he would take literally any answer he could find. How hard was it to explain what caused such rapid genetic mutation in the human populace, how it affected animals as well, how it happened everywhere on Earth at the same time, how it incorporated artificial technology into these mutations, how it seemingly fused different species' DNA at random, how it was able to break quantum physics at will, nullifying gravity for example, and how it was able to do all of this with a time frame of a week at best and over one night at worst. Okay, so maybe it was a little difficult to explain all that, but explaining how nuclear fission worked was also a little difficult, and that didn't cause people to brush it off and go, oh well. The poor boy, after having realized he wasn't going to get any answers simply by asking around, had decided to start doing his own research. Was it a good idea? Kinda. Pros. He was now much more knowledgeable on the subject of genetics, would probably never have to study for another biology class, unless he majored in it, could pick out what type of quirk a person had by looking at a graph of their DNA, emitter, mutation, or transformation, and had memorized the entire human evolution chart. Cons. He had now gone 10 days without a full 8 hours of sleep at night, his grades were slipping, except biology, and he may or may not have developed a slight fondness for coffee. Results. Lots of cool knowledge, but still no answer. Unfortunately, it was that second one that Izuku really cared about. Now that's not to say everything had been for nothing, far from it. He might not have had an answer quite yet, but he was much closer than before. He could feel it. His new knowledge had put him on the right track, and while it wasn't on par with any actual scientists, it was far above anything he was going to learn at his current school. Though he didn't realize exactly how far above the standard curriculum he was until he took a biology test 2 days ago. A 96, the highest grade in the class by an entire letter grade, and when he looked to see what he got wrong, well, on the back there was an 8-point sack that asked how quirks were passed down from parents to children. Most of the class had gotten the question right, simply copy and pasting the 2-sentence answer they got in class the day before. Izuku meanwhile, may or may not have gone a bit overboard. An hour into the test and his entire page was crammed full of giant paragraphs detailing how different types of quirks pass on differently, examples of how two parent quirks can fuse to create a child quirk of the two, quotes from several different studies and scientists, a graph of probability chances, and several of Izuku's own hypotheses on the subject matter, all in tiny handwriting. His teacher had put a big question mark on the page and given him half credit. Izuku shook his head, trying to get his thoughts back on track, as well as fight off the drowsiness that had snuck up on him. Coffee was a good substitute for sleep, but it wasn't a perfect replacement, and the teacher's mundane droning wasn't doing him any favors either. His research had given him answers, but not the ones he needed. The two main problems he found in his methodology were A, his lack of access to any form of information that wasn't either on Wikipedia or a study interview he could find online, and B, how every time he found something that seemed it would lead somewhere, it turned into a dead end. At least until last night. Last night, while looking for some more obscure researchers who would be more likely to at least send him a response email, he stumbled upon a scientist who had immediately piqued his interest. He was a well-learned geneticist who had also been through medical school and was a certified doctor. But what really caught Izuku's attention was his work. The man had focused solely on better understanding how quirks worked and how they affected the human genome. Further research revealed that many of the more advanced theories on quirkology were first written by him. Granted, how do quirks work is slightly different from what is a quirk, but hey, it had been almost a month, and Izuku was just taking what he could get at this point. Besides, the fact this man was actually looking into the mystery of quirks instead of just brushing it aside, like everyone else, was more than enough for the exhausted teen. But there was a small problem. The short list of information he had on the man was all there was. No date of birth, no pictures, and no records that the man even existed besides the two research papers Izuku had found. The fact his name was credited in small text on the newest renditions of quirk theory, and an old news article saying the man had somehow lost his doctor's license, of course. It hadn't mentioned why he had lost it. No, that would be too helpful. The man was practically a ghost. And as Izuku drifted off to sleep, he was at least able to take satisfaction in one small victory. He at least knew the man's name. Ichiko Daruma, the creator of the quirk singularity theory. Reign of Sins, Bakugo was thinking. Despite what most people assumed from his personality, Bakugo was more than some brainless brute. He might not be the Einstein of his generation, but he was definitely more than a few steps ahead of the extras he was surrounded by in class. He had to be if he wanted to be number one. Brawn without a brain is like a car with no engine, while brain without brawn is like an engine with no car. Neither will move alone, it takes both to get anywhere in life. His mother had told him some variation of that when he failed his first test back when he was very young, but he hadn't listened to her first lecture. 2 weeks later in another F, she had tweaked it the second time around to the one he remembered today. She made it appeal to his dream of being the best. He knew this, knew she was trying to manipulate him, but even then, it worked. He hadn't failed a single assignment since, and his average for any class never dropped below B. He was going to be the best, he was going to be number one no matter what it took. Which was why it was always so hecking infuriating that no matter how long he studied or how hard he tried, when the end of the grading period rolled around, he always came second in his grades ranking, right behind Deku. Every single goddamn time. Which was why he was thinking. He had gotten second place ever since they first started ranking the students, all the way back in the end of elementary. Always hecking second. Always behind hecking Deku. It was one of the reasons he hated him so much at times. Deku was smart, really hecking smart, but he didn't try to expand beyond his intelligence. And despite the fact he was an engine with no car, Deku had managed to beat him every semester. It was like a broken record that kept repeating itself over and over. But not this time. When they had gotten the results back this morning, he was on top, not Deku. Normally this would have been a time to celebrate, to rub it in the loser's face that Bakugo was the best. After all of these years he had finally won, finally proven that he deserved to be number one. But it was all wrong. This wasn't the glorious victory he imagined. This wasn't a triumph. No, this past semester had been his worst semester in years, barely scraping by in history with a B. But that wasn't even the worst part. Deku, the quirkless nerd who he had lost to again and again for years, wasn't in second place, wasn't even in third. Deku was 6. And so Bakugo was thinking. Deku had started coming to school with bags under his eyes, started missing homework, and started sleeping through classes. Deku was hecking sleeping through class. Something was wrong with the nerd. He was starting to act like an extra, which Bakugo knew he wasn't. He didn't like Deku by any stretch of the imagination, but the one-up had beaten him, even if it was only in their grades. That automatically put the nerd above the sea of extras. What would cause the idiot to nosedive so suddenly? It was almost like he wanted Katsuki to beat him. The explosion quirk user pushed his thoughts out of his mind. Just thinking around in circles wouldn't do anything. UA's entrance exam was in 9 months, and Bakugo needed to start doubling down on his training. If Deku wanted to become an extra, so be it. Katsuki Bakugo was destined to be number one. Deku never had any part in that. Bane of sins. Izuku groggily opened his eyes to find an empty classroom, lit only by the evening sun. No teacher, no students, no Bakugo. A quick glance at his phone informed him that his face hadn't been written on, and that class had ended half an hour ago. Of course they didn't wake me up, was the first thought to run through his mind. I'm just a nobody to them, but I can change that. He mumbled through a yawn. I'll prove I can be just as good of a hero as anyone else. No? You can't be a hero without a quirk. But how could he? How could he even hope to be a hero when the #1 pro, the man who had inspired him to become a hero in the first place, blatantly told him that he couldn't? How could he help anyone when he couldn't even save his childhood friend from a villain he helped escape? How could he prove to his mother that he could be a hero without her worrying? How could he? His downward spiral was interrupted by his phone buzzing. Later he told himself, one step at a time, I'll find an answer, then I'll think about everything, just not right now. His mother was messaging him asking him where he was and if he was okay. After school study group. He texted back, it would let her know he wasn't in any danger, and get him out of any trouble at the same time. Izuku wasn't a compulsive liar by any means, in fact the phenomenon was quite rare, but everyone lied every once in a while. Izuku was human, and as such was no exception. But as he started typing his reply, two very different phrases echoed through his head. Everyone can be a hero. No? You can't be a hero without a quirk, liar. I fell asleep in class, just woke up. He typed out instead. The green-haired boy didn't want to think about Almight right now, but one thing was for sure. I'm not lying to anyone like that. A few minutes later, and he was walking to the grocery store to pick up food for dinner tonight. His mom had chewed him out about sleeping in class, and tossed on his slipping grades as the metaphorical cherry on top, to drive the point home. Halfway through her rant she stopped herself, told him to go pick up groceries, and said that they would finish their chat when he got home. At first glance from an outside perspective it seemed a bit harsh of her. Izuku had been at the very top of his class since elementary school, now one bad semester, and she was freaking out. But Izuku knew she wasn't trying to be mean, she was just stressed, and more importantly, she was just worried. Izuku knew from a young age that his mother worried about him, and when he got a bit older he realized how stressed she was, but it wasn't until a few years ago that he realized how bad it really was. When her husband first got sick, she picked up a job to help pay bills. After he died she had picked up another. When Izuku had come home one day and innocently asked what college was, she picked up 2 more. When Izuku was declared quirkless, she dedicated almost all her free time to being at home for Izuku, pushing away all of her friends and related family, to make time for her son, only staying in contact with Bakugo's mom, because he was friends with him as a kid. She cooked, cleaned, worked 4 jobs, and desperately tried to pay bills that always seemed just out of budget, often going entire weeks just eating scraps, so Izuku could have a full stomach. This transitioned into the stress eating that had destroyed her figure, when their budget became more stable. The problem wasn't that she didn't care about Izuku, it was that she cared too much. And now his grades were slipping for the first time in his academic history, and she went full mama bear mode, worried something was wrong, and angry at herself for not preventing it. A sad smile graced his face. He'd have to calm her down when he got home, maybe even cook dinner for her so she could relax. But that was later. Right now he had to pick up some groceries. Bane of sins. Krugery was not in a good mood. Not only had he lost his bar that morning, but when he got back from the doctor's lab, an old warehouse down in the middle of nowhere, Tomura had complained about all the blood and dust everywhere, and told him to clean all the filth up. Well, excuse him, but that filth was his former customers. It wasn't Krugery's fault they were all dead. No, the blame for that lied on another person's head. The same person, might he add, that was telling him to clean it all up. But that wasn't all. No, Tomura just had to make everything more difficult. When he had gone to simply warp everything away into the ocean, Tomura had flipped out. You can't use your quirk yet. He had yelled, we're only on the starting level. We need to keep all out secret abilities hidden, so the bosses can't prepare for them. A few things. 1. What the heck? 2. This was Krugery's quirk. He was the one to decide how he used it. 3. His quirk was already on the quirk registry. It was registered when he first developed it as a child, so the pros and law enforcement in general already knew about his quirk. It was why he had never used it to steal anything or do anything criminal with it. 4. What the heck? So now here he was, browsing the cleaning section of the supermarket, because the anti-vacuum cleaner decided to put dust everywhere, and make him clean it without his quirk. Krugery didn't even have any cleaning equipment besides the sanitizer he used for his tables and alcohol glasses. He had always just warped any mess away, but not this time apparently. He had table polish, did that count? Did Tomura want him to just polish the dust away? That's not how table polish worked. That's not how any of this worked. Krugery let out a sad sigh, as he came to terms that the stress from all this may have been impacting him a bit more than he would have preferred. And even if it wasn't, he wasn't usually this negative, but today was proving to be an exception for basically every rule he had. He started counting up how much everything would cost, while double-checking his small basket as he turned a corner, only to drop said basket when someone ran straight into him. The bartender just stood there for a few seconds trying to understand what happened, his mental math now floating around his head like a puzzle that had fallen and smashed itself to pieces on the floor. Looking down, he was greeted by a groaning teenager with a mop of green hair spiraled out on the ground. His cleaning supplies were on the floor, mixed with a large array of various ingredients such as carrots and onions. Krugery's first instinct was to scold the kid for not looking where he was going. No, he scolded himself. I was the one who turned the corner so suddenly, there's no way he could have seen me coming. No one is at fault here. Just because I've had a shitty day doesn't mean I have to make someone else's day shitty too. Reaching down, he grabbed the boy's phone which had landed next to his foot. He was about to hand it back when something curious caught his eye. On the phone, several news articles were opened. 2 were articles on quirkology, the rest. Krugery's eyes narrowed dangerously. Why is he searching for information on Dr. Yujiko? It was a very good question, one that required an equally good answer if the kid was to stay out of any trouble. He cast another look at the young man who was picking himself off the ground, this time looking for clues. His eyes caught sight of a book that had fallen from the boy's backpack. Advanced Quirk Theory Vol. 5, by Stephen Joseph. The book read. Now Krugery knew something was definitely wrong. That book was far beyond the reading level of just any random student. He hadn't even understood half of what the first volume talked about when he read it a year or 2 back, and now some middle schooler comes by, just casually reading highly advanced material, while searching for information on Dr. Yujiko. Something was up, but what could it pose? And then it clicked. Dr. Yujiko had spoken at great lengths about his several assistants, and how he hoped they would one day help him create his greatest masterpiece. Now, the doctor was a bit odd at times, but even then, wasn't this kid a bit young to be an assistant? And why was he in the grocery store of all places? You would think an evil genius would have better things for his great assistants to do than run errands. Wait, was the kid lost? The lab was in the middle of nowhere, and the doctor seemed like the type of person who forgot to give out directions every once in a while. Combine that with the fact Yujiko had said he had multiple labs around Japan, and often had people move between them, and well, Krugery may have had a bad day, but that didn't mean everyone had to. The rain of sins. Ow. Izuku mumbled as he pushed his way to his feet. He had known running through the store to get home quicker was a bad idea, but he had wanted to get back home to his mom as fast as he could. He had gotten all the ingredients without any problem though, so he figured he could try to multitask, looking up some info while he ran to the checkout line. It obviously hadn't worked. Looking up, he was greeted by a strange sight. A man seemingly made completely of mist was holding Izuku's phone out to him. "Thank you," he said as he grabbed his phone from the man. "No problem, young man. I'm sorry I caused you to drop your things. Please allow me to help." "Sure," he responded, not really sure what else to say. A minute later, and Izuku, with the help of the man, had collected all his stuff and put it neatly back in his basket. Deku was about to thank the man again before he broke the silence. "By any chance, would you be looking for Dr. Yujiko's lab?" "Well, I mean absolutely." He hadn't been, but now he knew about it, he most certainly was. The man gave a good-natured chuckle. "I thought so. Wait just one moment." He spread out his hand and opened. Wait, was it a portal? Izuku didn't get the chance to observe anything more, because after a second the man pulled out a pen and a small scrap of paper, closing the portal afterwards. He jotted down something on the paper before holding it out. "Here," he said, offering it to Izuku. "It's where his lab is. I was there earlier today." Looking at the paper revealed an address that Izuku wasn't immediately familiar with. He looked back to the man to thank him, for the 3rd time, only to find him walking away. "Wait," he called. "What's your name?" "Krugery." The man answered as he turned around. "Yours?" "Izuku Midoriya." "Well then, Mr. Midoriya, it was a pleasure meeting you. Have a good day," Krugery said with a small bow, before turning back around. Izuku stood there, watching the mist man as he walked away, before finally dragging his eyes back down to the small scrap of paper in his hand. A grin spread across his face. "I have a lead." The butterfly had flapped its wings, and now the storm was brewing. Izuku was nervous. Okay, maybe that didn't really do the situation justice. Izuku was, and always had been, a tad socially awkward, as well as being an individual who naturally shied away from attention. Unfortunately, it wasn't until he was practically a block away from his destination that he realized how much his plan went directly against both of those things. It sounded fine at the time. He reasoned, just go up, knock on the door, ask if Dr. Yujiko worked there, and if I could talk to him. Yes, walk up to an unknown door, knock, put all attention on him, and ask a complete stranger if they knew if another complete stranger worked at the building, and then ask if he could talk to said stranger. All perfectly normal and easy for someone like Izuku to accomplish, especially at midnight of all times. He was really starting to wish Almight hadn't saved him from the sludge villain. After he got the address from Mr. Krugery, Izuku had gone home, gotten scolded by his mother, gotten cried on by his mother, and then made dinner for and ate with his mother. His original plan had been to get a good night's sleep and then go in the morning, hopefully well rested enough to not make a complete fool of himself. 2.5 hours of tossing and turning in bed, unable to sleep, and he had decided to just get it over with, throwing the address into his phone's map, only realizing what time it was when he did all the other problems with his plan. When he was cold, tired, and less than a block away from his destination, Izuku let out a sigh bordering between exhausted and exasperated. His determined hero mindset and his normal mindset were very different. Anyone who had seen the two could attest to just how different he acted when he flipped between the two. A bold young man, determined enough to run headfirst into danger with a smile on his face, became a stuttering boy who couldn't so much as talk to a girl without dissolving into an incoherent mess. Needless to say, they didn't always work together the best. His current situation was a fine example of this. Plans made when he was in hero mode didn't tend to work that well after it wore off. Come on Izuku, you can't give up now. You'll never be a hero if you can't even knock on a door. The quirkless boy steeled his resolve as he turned the corner, preparing to face the place that could very well hold the answer to the question he'd been chasing for over a month now, only to find. Is it an old warehouse? He asked no one in particular. No, I must have put in the wrong address. It was one of the only logical conclusions his worn-out brain could come to. Why would the scientist who had almost single-handedly created the basis for modern-day quirk theory be working out of an old abandoned concrete hut in the middle of downtown? But as he checked the map, then the address, then pulled out his scrap of paper to double-check, hit his phone a few times, checked the map again, and then re-entered the address in his phone, another logical conclusion came to him. Did Mr. Krugery lie to me, he wondered, but no, that didn't make sense either. What would he get from sending Izuku on a wild goose chase for a made-up lab? Plus he had referred to the man as Dr. Yujiko, not Scientist Yujiko, meaning he had to have some previous knowledge of the doctor, which supported the theory he knew him. You've come too far to chicken out now. Izuku scolded himself as he forced his feet to move towards the door. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? The reign of sins. Iruma Yujiko was an oddity of a man. If you were to ask his assistants or anyone else who worked for him, they wouldn't say anything downright negative about the doctor, but they would definitely make it known that he had his issues, just like everyone else. He was overbearing, constantly checking on the various projects he had given to his employees, and critiquing them as they worked. He liked to micromanage, seemingly determined to have a hand in everything that was going on, all the way down to walking around and testing various appliances, to make sure they were working and well stocked. He was unempathetic at times, uncaring for reasons or excuses for missing deadlines, unless it was a really, really good one. But one word seemed to come up much more than any other in the hushed conversations in hallways. He was a perfectionist. Now that last one seemed a bit unfair. All the other ones, sure he could totally agree with, but he wasn't a perfectionist. No, Yujiko knew that not everything could be perfect, in fact very few things ever could. This was why he put so much time and care and effort into his creations. They were his artwork, they were his children, they were his gifts to his master, and one day he would create his magnum opus. His true masterpiece. There would be no flaws, no errors, it would be what so few things could ever achieve. Perfection. However, just because he didn't expect perfection from his assistants, he most certainly expected them to do their jobs right. This lab was supposed to be completely set up and running 3 days ago, Yujiko growled. So can anyone explain to me why the security system hasn't even been started on yet? Well sir, we were running perfectly on schedule, even ahead of it actually, until a few weeks ago. Oh? The doctor paused, turning to the brave worker in a lab coat, who had interrupted he sent a quick glance at his watch, now 25-minute rant. Well then why didn't you say so sooner? It's not like that doesn't change the fact you are now behind schedule. He swatted at her with a small stack of papers in his hand, growling when his height caused him to miss her head, and lightly whack her shoulder instead. Sir, we can explain. Well then explain. Now. Heroes. A woman from the small group of workers he had been scolding for the past half hour stepped forward. He recognized her as the scientist he put in charge of this, very unfinished, lab. A string of robberies took place and hero activity skyrocketed. We had to slow down everything to avoid detection. She said with her hands clasped firmly behind her back. It was my order, sir. If you're going to punish someone, then I'm the one at fault. The doctor gnashed his teeth and turned away from the group to find something to punch. The closest potential victim was a cardboard box lying on the ground, which soon became a very dented box after a quick kick to his side. It's always heroes this, heroes that. They don't even know the lab's here, and yet they still seem hell-bent on causing me problems. The short genius grumbled some choice words under his breath before spinning back around to his people, jabbing the lady with his papers. Fine, I'll let it slide. But just this once. The crowd let out a sigh of relief. Now what are you all still doing here? Scram. Run. Back to your stations. I want this lab up and running by Sunday, no Friday. And if it's not damn sparkling when I come to check on it again, I'll have all of you scrubbing toilets for a year. He yelled as they all ran off with relieved smiles on their faces. With a toothbrush. The doctor took a moment to compose himself, panting slightly from all his yelling. Feeling a hand lightly pat his head, he swatted at the offending appendage with his trusty paper stack. Thank you for your understanding, Dr. Yujiko. Yairito, the lab's head scientist, said as she calmly walked past him, a friendly smirk on her face. The doctor growled as he attempted to put his imaginary hair back in place. Stress and age did terrible things to one's style. I would fire her and her sassy ass attitude if she weren't so damn good at her job. He complained to no one in particular as he watched her walk away. He sighed as he rubbed his temple and ran through everything in his head, trying to figure out how far back this would push his plans, when a light knock echoed from the door. The mad scientist raised his head, about to yell at someone to answer it, before pausing and letting out an annoyed huff when he realized he just sent them all off. I swear to God, Krugery, he complained to himself as he marched towards the door. I know I said, come back anytime if you need anything. But I figured it was implied that anytime didn't include the middle of the damn night. What do you want now? He yelled as he swung the door open, only to find that's not Krugery. His sleep-deprived mind noted it's just a kid. And indeed there was, in fact, just a kid standing at the door. A few moments passed with the two both staring at each other, but just as the green-haired boy worked up the courage to say something, Izuku came to a conclusion. Not my kid, not my problem. He told himself as he shut the door. Wait, he stopped a few paces from the door. There's a kid at the door. He blinked behind his goggles. There's a kid at the door of one of my secret labs. Shit. He made a 180-degree correction to his course and flung the door open. Kid. He yelled at the teen who appeared to have been dejectedly walking away. Get over here. The kid scrambled back towards the door, his face seeming like it couldn't decide if it should smile in joy or cry in terror, or do both at the same time. What the hell are you doing here? The boy tried to respond, he really did, but with the traits of bad at talking to people, bad at talking to strangers, and bad at talking to angry people, forming a metaphorical bingo, all that came out was a noise that most closely resembled a porcupine dying in an echo chamber. What? I spit it out, boy. I'm looking for driver Izuku. The scientist's eyes narrowed to a dangerous degree, as his left arm slipped under his lab coat and thumbed the pistol that sat at his side. He was a scientist, a doctor, and his quirk wasn't combat-oriented, but that didn't mean he was defenseless. Any villain dumb enough to not carry any form of protection wouldn't be a villain for very long. You're looking for Daruma Izuku. Yes, do you know him? Izuku took a moment to better examine the boy. His green hair was disheveled as if he had just crawled out of bed. He was wearing blue jeans, sneakers, and a white t-shirt with the words "T-shirt" scribbled on the front. On top of that he had a jacket haphazardly thrown on to protect him against the night's cold. His jeans had small pockets, too small to be concealing any guns, but still able to fit a pocket knife in each. His shoes, again, too small to carry a gun, but small knives could easily be slipped beneath the soles. No bags that could be explosives, and his shirt lacked any sort of carrying capacity. The most dangerous variables were the boy's jacket, which had big enough pockets to hold a small gun or large knife, and that the kid was scrawny enough to have knives or even a small handgun strapped to his chest, arms, or legs, without causing any real displacement of his clothes. There were no signs of a mutation-type quirk, which meant the kid most likely had an emitter or transformation-type quirk. Those were the most annoying because they were the hardest to make educated guesses about from appearances alone. Combat analysis. The kid couldn't be armed with anything more than light weapons, but had an unknown quirk which could prove to be very dangerous. Izuku on the other hand had a heavy pistol, a not set up security system, a small squad of guards patrolling the building, and a handful of Nomu that had been transferred to the lab yesterday, although it would take time for either of the latter groups, his heaviest hitters, to get to his location. He brought a hand to his goggles, making a show of adjusting them, as if to see the kid better. He's here alone. The doctor observed as he scanned the courtyard and adjacent abandoned warehouses, with the infrared vision he had enabled on his goggles. He's either really confident in his abilities, or he's an idiot. Well, of course I know him, he said, deciding to take a risk and gauge his opponent's reaction. He's me. The kid's eyes grew to the size of saucers, and his jaw dropped. Why you're? Yes, I am Dr. Izuku. Might I ask who you are, and more importantly why you're here? My name is Izuku Midoriya, and I stopped stuttering and spit it out, boy. I need to ask you a question. Oh really? Izuku leaned forward slightly to disguise the motion of him pulling the gun out of its holster, and bringing it up to his chest. And what question would that be? The gun's safety was flicked off with an inaudible click. Because, well, let's just say, I do hope it's a good one. The gun was now lying with the boy's head, hidden perfectly behind Izuku's lab coat. The bullet hole in his coat wouldn't be that big of a deal, it could always be replaced. The boy's head on the other hand, the kid tracked down a disgraced scientist. A man who had his entire presence practically erased from the world. Every book he had ever written, either burned or in his own possession. The internet scrubbed of his existence by All for One's top hackers. A man who only ever left the safety of his labs when traveling between them, and even then only traveling via Nomu with a warp quirk. A man who was one of the very few to work for All for One directly. Learn of his existence, pinpoint where his hidden labs were, pinpoint which one he was at and when he was at it, because he never stayed in one place for very long, and then corner him at midnight when no one was around, all to ask a question. It better be a very, very good question. The boy clenched his fists and took a deep breath. The scientist steadied his gun and prepared himself. What is a quirk? Izuku wasn't drunk enough for this. Did YR need a live body for experimentation? No wait, this lab was to see if there was a way to add quirks to Nomu after they were created, not for making the creatures. But she could still use one, right? Nah, it didn't really matter. He'd hand the kid off to the lab head, and then finally get some sleep. Despite what the outside of the building implied, the inside was very much not abandoned, full of people in lab coats running around doing various tasks. Izuku wore a gobsmacked expression on his face as he was led through the stale white hallways of the lab by Dr. Yujiko. It wasn't a grand tour of the facility by any means, he didn't even know where he was being led to, but even just the things he could glimpse through cracked open doors and clear windows had him speechless. Whoa, is it a DNA sequencer? I almost didn't recognize it due to how advanced it looks. Are they setting up a cryogenic storage facility over there? Holy crap, that's a CRISPR machine. I thought they stopped developing that tech back. Wait, what are those giant glass tubes? The green-haired teen had his eyes opened as wide as they could go, determined to see as much as possible in the underground lab that looked like something straight out of a sci-fi film. Of course, the irony of this was, despite how determined he was to see everything, he didn't notice the giant metal door locking behind him when he entered the building, the small squad of guards that had fallen into line on either side of him, or the giant lizard-like creature with an exposed brain stalking him from the air vents, ordered to pounce if it sensed the boy activating his quirk. Ironically, the scariest of those three was also the least dangerous to the very quirkless Izuku. Despite the amazing situation, or perhaps because of it, Izuku's curiosity was still strong enough to rear its head at the worst of times. Excuse me, Dr. Yujiko. He stuttered. Why are they working when the lab is, well, you know. Izuku had been lead down to the third level of the lab, and while this floor alone had enough machinery and scientific know-how to put most professional institutions to shame, the second had been filled with half-done wiring, partially set up lab equipment, and various machines covered in plastic tarps. And the first floor, well, there were enough boxes that Izuku hadn't realized he was being led into a lab until the second level. They're behind schedule on getting the lab completely set up, but they still have the common sense to get started on their other projects. The scientist huffed. They just missed one deadline. They're not suicidal enough to miss two. Now be quiet, we're almost there. Now Izuku didn't exactly know where this there was, but his social anxiety assured him that he didn't need to ask, so instead he focused on observing the man in front of him instead. People always say that when you meet a celebrity in real life, they're almost always shorter than you imagined them being. Izuku had never really believed in those sorts of myths before, but Dr. Yujiko was, well, he wasn't exactly what you would call a tall person. From what the teen could tell, the man was standing somewhere around 5 feet tall, 1.524 meters, not a midget, but considering Izuku, a middle schooler, had to look down when talking to him, it was definitely a noticeable factor. The man had a fair amount of weight, an amount that would usually look relatively normal on anyone else, but that was further exemplified by his short height, giving him a slightly egg-like appearance. The man hadn't a spare hair on his head, it had seemingly all migrated to his very bushy, and very unkempt, mustache. Toss on some steampunk-esque goggles and a lab coat to top it all off, and you have the very unique appearance of the famous Daruma Yujiko. A man who, Izuku could firmly vouch, had no right being so damn intimidating when he looked like a mini Dr. Eggman from the Sonic games. Approaching the end of the hallway, a large metal door slid away to reveal what appeared to be a break room of sorts. Crisp blue cushions covered couches that lined the sides of the room, a microwave with several fish pastries in it sat in a corner, and in the center of the room, several metal chairs were strewn around a coffee table, all angled so that they were facing the TV on the wall. Izuku nudged Izuku into the room and gave him a shooing motion. The boy took this as an invitation to sit down on one of the couches. Stay still and don't touch anything, the doctor said as he fished his phone out of his pocket. Don't be loud either, I'm making a call. The guards that had been following them took positions on either side of the door, and the doctor grumbled something along the lines of, couldn't get the lab ready in time, but of course they got the break room done. As he started pushing buttons, with armed guards standing around menacingly, and his host of sorts impatiently tapping his foot as he waited for his phone call to connect, Izuku was left to his own devices. Looking around the room, what else was he gonna do? The teen was greeted with two people he hadn't seen at first. Two lab employees had been on their break when Izuku and Ko had entered. They had peeked up in interest before quickly agreeing that it was above their pay grade, and quickly went back to their conversation. I'm telling you man, Almight's quirk has gotta be a mutation type. There's no way a normal human could ever punch that hard. No way, it's definitely a transformation type quirk. Think about it, in all his years of heroing we've never seen him without a full bodysuit. I guarantee you that whenever he activates his quirk, don't give me that look Fred, we've had this conversation before, he yells out his smashes as a way to activate his quirk. When he activates his quirk, I guarantee you it does something to his muscles, kinda like a turbo boost of sorts. Excuse me. The two friends looked up from their small debate to the source of the disturbance. Almight's quirk is actually an emitter type, Izuku nervously stated while scratching his neck. Look kid, this isn't a playground, the adults are talking, now shoo. Oh come on Fred, don't be such an ass, the kid's only trying to give an opinion. The second scientist motioned to the green-haired boy. Now you said an emitter quirk. Why would that be? Well you see, if you look at when Almight does any of his smashes, you'll notice they all share one key detail that most people tend to overlook. Fumbling out his phone he started to flip through various photos, looking for an example to use. Here. What do these 4 pictures have in common? He held out his phone which showed Almight using various special moves in combat. I mean he's punching. Well yes, but that wasn't what I was talking about. Here, look closer. Zooming in on the photos he showed them again, this time even bringing up a video for reference. Look kid, I really don't, steam. Fred was cut off by his friend Fred at steam. Look, he's making steam. Fred leaned in closer, squinting at the photo before his jaw dropped. Holy shit. Exactly. Izuku was in game mode, stutter completely gone. Every time he attacks he gives off steam. I don't know for sure, but I believe that, since he's never shown any form of heat-related abilities, it's a byproduct of his quirk. And what's the type of quirk that has been scientifically proven to have the highest chance of giving off a byproduct? Emitter quirks. The 2 men responded, their voices a whisper as the realization dawned on them. Exactly. Izuku answered. At first I thought it was a transformation type. He reflected. After that show on the roof, how could I not? But he said he's been deteriorating since his fight 2 years ago, meaning the difference between his 2 forms must not have originally been so drastic, if there was any difference at all. But now that there is such a big difference, he's pushing his quirk the extra mile to save face and keep the public happy, which would also explain why his time limit is so short. A rare frown graced the boy's face as he thought back to the roof. I know he said it's for the best, that he's doing it to keep society stable, but he's lying to millions of people. Has been for years if he's to be believed, kid. Izuku was snapped from his thoughts by Dr. Yujiko, who had walked over at some point during the conversation. The cautious but undoubtedly curious look filled his eyes, his phone held closed and forgotten at his side. Come here. He gestured for Izuku to follow, and led him out into the hallway, out of hearing range of the 2 employees. Alright kid. The doctor turned to the boy. You show up at my lab in the middle of the night, ask a stupid question that even a kindergarten teacher could answer, and then immediately afterward proceed to run mental circles around some of my best employees, as if they were children. His eyes narrowed. You have 30 seconds. Explain. I will. You see no stuttering. It wastes time and is incredibly annoying. 25 seconds left. Izuku opened his mouth to speak, paused, closed it, took a deep breath, and began again. I'm quirkless, sir. Ichiko raised an eyebrow and motioned for him to continue. I'm quirkless. I'm quirkless, and I was born into a world where that's seen as a disability. He clenched his hands. No matter how hard I try, no matter how hard I work, no matter what I do, it always comes back to quirks. The things he had been pushing off, the things he didn't want to think about, were coming back to him, but this time there was no I'll deal with it later to help him. It doesn't matter if it's authority. Kid, you have a second pinky toe joint. It's very unlikely you're ever going to get a quirk. Friends, I don't want your friendship. Family, I'm so sorry sweetie. Or even if it's the person I always wanted to be. No. A quirkless person can be a hero. Faces flashed through his mind. Dismissive, angry, sad, disappointed. It doesn't matter who, it doesn't matter why, it doesn't matter where. It always comes back to me being quirkless. It always does, every time. And so I just want to know. Tears were streaming down his face, the emotions he had been bottling up, finally spilling over. Just what it is that makes me so worthless to everyone. His cry, filled with years' worth of emotions and grief, seemed to deafen the entire lab. For a few moments everything was perfectly quiet. Then Izuku fell like a puppet with its strings cut, just barely managing to catch himself on the closest wall, silent sobs racking his entire frame. Ichiko watched the entire ordeal silently before checking his watch. 30 seconds exactly. He met as he glanced at the boy. He has a good head on his shoulders, is plenty knowledgeable, a quick thinker, and from what I can tell, has a decent grasp on quirk theory. A crash followed a muffled shout from the construction on the floor above, had to him internally cringing and, considering the lab was supposed to be at least operable a week ago, and most likely won't be for another 5 days, I'm behind schedule, a few weeks at best and a month at worst. It would definitely be helpful to bring on some more hands to help speed everything up, especially someone who has shown they can outdo my current employees, and outdo them by quite a large margin. You know, with a bit of training. Alright kid, you've earned yourself a single shot. A chance at a chance, if you will. Wah. But I ain't handing out charity here. You gotta at least know what you're doing, and I don't have the time to go interviewing every nutjob who has half a brain. The doctor pulled a small towel from his lab coat, the kind used to clean up spilled chemicals, and handed it to Izuku. You need to prove that you deserve it, he continued as the aspiring hero wiped the wetness from his face. So I have something to determine just that. What's that? Izuku managed to get out between hiccups. The question. One question, here and now, no preparation. If you get it right, I'll answer your question. Izuku's eyes widened. But there's no partial credit, either you get it right, Yujiko crossed his arms, or you don't. That's unfair. Unreasonable. Life doesn't care about any of those things. It doesn't care if you're ready. He looked Izuku in the eye, and it doesn't care if you're quirkless. So, do you accept? Midoriya gulped as he straightened himself and finished wiping away the last of the tears from his face. Yes. He answered, pulling his emotions together as much as possible. Yes, I do. Alright then. Yujiko stroked his mustache and thought, let's see, you clearly know your stuff when it comes to quirks, let's work with that. As the elusive scientist was thinking, Izuku was scrambling to prepare himself. What is a quirk? He had spent a month searching for an answer to the question. He had spent a month writing letters to anyone who would listen. He had spent a month constantly being laughed off by people. He had spent a month researching countless articles only to find nothing. He had spent a month trying to answer the one annoying question, only for it to all come down to one single shot. Call it petty, call it him being overly persistent, but he was getting an answer, damn it. What Yujiko started. Here it comes. Is the most important part of any quirk. What? Did he mishear him? That was a no? Izuku cut off that train of thought as quickly as possible. What is a quirk? Was also supposed to be a simple question, and look where that led him. There's definitely something deeper at play here. Most people would respond with how powerful it is, its usefulness in combat, or even how heroic it was, but those views were all based on how society views quirks, not quirks themselves. Its usability. No, that's too vague. Its uniqueness. Water quirks are relatively rare and are highly sought after as firefighters. Meanwhile, strength quirks are a dime a dozen, meaning only the extremely powerful ones ever really make a huge name for themselves. Izuku opened his mouth to give his answer, only to snap it back shut. No, that can't be it either. The question specifically states any quirk, not just specific types. He gave a quick glance back towards the doctor, hoping for a hint. The man instead huffed, pulled out his phone and set a timer for 20 seconds. Crap. That just made it worse. He squeezed his eyes shut and tried to forget about all the stress that had just been put on him. Think, Izuku, think. What's the most important type of any quirk? You've been researching quirks for a month now, surely you've read something about this. The timer was now making audible ticks as it counted down, signifying that it was almost done. Okay, calm down, you can do this. Work backwards. 13, 12, 11. Almight's quirk is one of the most incredible ones out there. What's the most important part of it? Its power. Its limitations. The way he uses it. 10, 9, 8. Think, damn it, think. 7, 6, 5. You've literally have done nothing but look at quirks all your life. Why can't you answer the question? 4, 3, 2. Wait, his eyes shot open and his inspiration struck him like a bolt of divine lightning. What if it's not about quirks? The alarm went off and Yujiko sighed. Times you, I've got it. The answer I mean, Izuku clarified. I have an answer. Well, what is it? The scientist asked, a bit off-put, how the previously quiet boy had suddenly gotten very loud very fast. The most important part of a quirk isn't the quirk at all. A smile spread across his face as everything started clicking together in his head. It's the pastry. Yujiko blinked as Izuku continued. Quirks are like a microwave, and the person is like a pastry. The two scientists on break weren't the only thing he saw when he was looking around the break room. No, off in the corner was a microwave heating up some pastries. And that was cause for his sudden inspiration. Microwaves heat up a pastry, just like how quirks power up people. Izuku, not realizing how odd his analogy sounded, as per usual, was at this point making hand gestures to help visualize it. If it works out well, you get a heated pastry, just like how heroes get an awesome power. But if the pastry can't handle the heat, it blows up. And you can't have a person blow up because of their quirk, so the most important part to any quirk is the pastry. Yujiko, seeing what Izuku was getting at, kinda grinned and started to say something. Because it's actually a super pastry. Only to be interrupted by Izuku's rambling. Think about it. The microwave makes pastries better by heating them up, but in order to handle that, they already have to be super. Like the pro-hero edge shot, his reaction time is unparalleled in the world of heroes, but his quirk has nothing to do with that. Or heroes in general. They're thrown through walls and hit with tons of blunt force almost every day. But if you look at medical textbooks, that sort of force should kill people almost instantly. But heroes can get up without anything worse than a few bruises. Even heroes without fire quirks for heat resistance have taken blasts of fire that should have roasted them alive, and while they were hurt, that's still a far cry from being dead. He paused for a deep breath. So, the most important part to any quirk is that just by having one they automatically boost a person's natural limits. Izuku looked, with a confident grin covering his face, to Dr. Yujiko. His face was about as blank as they came. The construction seemed muted, scientists weren't running through the halls, everything was silent. Then Dr. Yujiko started to chuckle. Then he started to laugh. Sir? Pacey's you know. The doctor said through the glove he now had covering his mouth, that that wasn't what I was going for at all. Izuku's stomach twisted. Had he really gotten it so wrong to be laughed at? I was thinking of the built-in mental barriers. What's the point of having a fire quirk if you snicker if you fry yourself by burning hotter than your quirk's heat resistance goes? So I was wrong. From the rules I set, yes. Izuku suddenly felt like he had swallowed a lead brick. His head fell. But that's the thing, your answer was so much better. Only to shoot back up in surprise. It's a proven, if obscure, fact that humanity's newest stage in evolution has given us much more than flashy powers. Yujiko stated, in order for people to use these powers, human bodies have to be able to adapt to the extreme forces they create. This adaptability works in conjunction with mental barriers to keep people with strength quirks from blasting their own arm off every time they throw a punch. However, very few people actually realize the extent of humanity's new adaptability. Get punched enough and you'll adapt to become more durable. Get burned enough, and you'll adapt to have basic heat resistance. People go to the gym quite often these days, but they don't realize their true potential. They stop lifting weights when they feel fatigued, but if they instead keep going, keep pushing until their muscles are ripping themselves from the bone, and then do it again every week, the body will be forced to adapt to the training, just like it would be forced to adapt to a strength quirk. Now you'll never get to the level of someone with a strength-enhancing quirk just through training, but... He grinned. Several of my experiments have shown just how close you can get. This is why schools like UA have so much of their curriculum based around physical fighting. He held up his hand. The entrance exam, hero classes, the sports festival, final exams. He listed off on his fingers, even the hero licensing test. All of these have students beaten down to become more resilient. So yes, your answer was much better than the one I expected. He let out a laugh. And your passion. Yujiko's smile slanted at an angle that just seemed wrong. It reminded me of myself when I speak of my art. Haha. Talent is a dime a dozen these days, kid. People pop up with some quirk and suddenly they're a prodigy, but it's so rare to find true unbridled passion. And passion, he shouted as he threw his arms in the air, is the most important part of art. So I did it. I won. If that's what you want to call getting the question right, then sure. Izuku couldn't help the small smile that came to his face. Sure, saying I won after getting a question right did sound a bit dumb, but now he'd get an answer to his question, and that was a victory. A small victory for sure, but when was the last time he really had one of those? When he was diagnosed quirkless. When he lost Bakugo as a friend. When he made his mother cry. When he met Almight. No? He answered himself as he wiped away the small amount of tears that were stinging his eyes. Getting his question answered was a very small victory, but after a lifetime of failures, it felt like it was as big as a mountain. Izuku couldn't help but laugh when he thought about his situation. He had purposely thrown himself into trying to answer his random question of what is a quirk, as a way to distract himself from his meeting with All Might on the roof, but his horrible way of coping had actually wound up giving him exactly what he needed. A spark of hope. If he could learn an entire field's worth of material that was way above his head, contact scientists from all over the globe, track down a ghost of a man in the middle of nowhere, all to get some random question answered, and all in a month, then what was getting a 70 on the UA entrance exam? He didn't have to get the highest score after all, he just had to pass. It was a small victory, but that was all he needed, small victories, because with enough of them, even small victories could change the world. 3 days. Izuku looked up in confusion. 3 days. 3 days. Yujiko repeated, I want you back here, at 5 PM sharp, in 3 days. But why? I don't have to tell you why. He said as he started pushing Izuku towards the nearest set of stairs. I'm the genius of the century, you're just some random kid who turned up on my doorstep. I don't have to tell you anything. But my question. Your question is why you're gonna make sure to come back. You don't come back, you don't get an answer. Capiche. But you saw. I said I'd answered, I never said when I would. They passed floor 2 and continued upwards. Learn to read the fine print before you go making random deals, especially with shady people you met up with late at night. Beep-boo. Now go home, get some sleep, etc. etc. I don't care, just be back here in 3 days. He pushed Izuku through a set of double doors, into a hallway filled with boxes, and pointed down the hallway to a large steel door. The same door Izuku first knocked on. And stopped stuttering. He yelled as he gave the boy a small shove to get him moving. It's annoying. By innocence, Izuku stood in front of several large monitors, and watched the green-haired boy walk off into the night, the freshly installed cameras finally doing what they should have been doing for over a week now. The stakes of that question had been riding a lot higher than he had let on. After all, he never said what would happen if the kid answered wrong. He had expected the kid to get it wrong. But the kid hadn't, instead he had overperformed to the extreme. Super pacers. Really? He chuckled to himself. I was the one to prove how humanity's new adaptability was crucial in the use of quirks, and I was also the one who later proved just how much potential humanity's new adaptability had, although I had lost all my credibility at that time, so no one really took me seriously. He frowned and thought, that period of time had been an especially low point in his life, if his master hadn't found him when he did. But much more pressingly, that second bit of research was all erased when master erased my presence from the world. He couldn't have found anything on it online, he had to have come to that conclusion by himself. But I spent years on that theory, and I was one of the most capable scientists in the world at the time, so for a kid to catch onto it, even if it was only the basics, he's definitely someone to keep an eye on. Sir, what should we do? The mad scientist sent a lazy glance over his shoulder at the new head security officer behind him. He had fired the old one back when he was in the break room. What idiot lets a secret lab get snuck up on, by a middle schooler of all people? Focus on getting the security system completely set up and running, but other than that, nothing for now. What about the intruder? The kid? What about him? Sir, he found the lab. Are you really just going to let him go? I hardly think putting 3 different trackers on the boy, each with a microphone to let us listen in, and having several teams ready to be deployed to take him down at any time, can be considered letting him go. But what if he was working with the police, or a villain group? Shouldn't we have killed him? You're thinking too short term. Izuku responded flatly as he brought up a new screen, this one a map of the city with 3 dots on it, one for each tracker put on the boy. If he was working for someone, and we killed him, it wouldn't solve the problem. They would still know where the lab is, and even worse, they would have known it was one of mine just by the question they had the kid ask. Does Dr. Izuku work here? He mocked the kid's stutter. Killing him was a no-go, capturing and interrogating him for information wouldn't have been any good either. He was sent out alone, that means he's expendable, and expendable people aren't kept in the loop. Therefore the only logical move was to let him go and watch his moves. Sending a team to shadow him is too noticeable a move, and would raise immediate suspicion, so by process of elimination, putting trackers on him was the only viable option. But what if he disposes of them somehow? PSHHH, the doctor waved his hand in a dismissive gesture. I put one on his jacket, one on his shirt, and one in his hair. They're microscopic and they're sticky as hell. I should know, I helped make them. The only way he gets them off is by washing them off with hot water. And the only place he's likely to take any sort of shower or wash his clothes is at home, where the trackers will helpfully show us the location of. And if he doesn't come back in 3 days, or leads us to a hideout. If he doesn't come back, then we send in a team and kill him. If he leads us to a hideout, then we send in a team, shoot the place up, and then kill him. Easy as cake. The only loss for us would be having to relocate the lab, which would put him even further behind schedule, again. But that was for later. Right now he had given himself 3 days to gather information and see what was up. Great, now I gotta go get a bunch of info diggers to get a hold of the kid's records, see if he's working for anyone. Then I need to get some form of surveillance system set up outside wherever he leads us to. He sighed. The kid had potential, but the whole damn thing just screamed of a setup. He hoped the kid's story held up, that he was just some random teenager who wanted his question answered, and even that was fishy as hell. But if it somehow did turn out to be true, it would save him so much work. But if life had taught him anything, the odds of something actually causing him to have less work. I'm not getting any sleep tonight, am I? Izuku sighed. There have been multiple times in Izuku's life when he could just tell that he was screwed. It wasn't always about something he could see either, such as just before the slime villain popped out of the sewers. It was something he felt in his bones. Izuku Midoriya stood in the living room dressed in her pajamas, tapping her foot impatiently. Where have you been? This was one of those times. Don't just stand there, say something. Mom, do you have any idea how worried I was? You don't. Her angry facade barely lasted 20 seconds before her worry started to crack it from the inside out. I woke up to get a glass of water, only to find you gone. She stepped forward into the lamplight to reveal a face stained with tears and eyes that were red from hours of crying. At midnight, Izuku. I didn't know if you had been kidnapped or something worse. All I could do was sit and pray and think, and all I could do was sit there when I realized that you. Mom, I'm sorry. Any further thought process on the situation was cut off when his mother smothered him in one of her patented mom hugs, and started sobbing into his shoulder. The living room was dark, only a single small lamp and the light of the moon providing any light. The sobs of a scarred mother accompanied only by the light pitter-patter of newly started rain. A glass of wine laid half empty on the table. I was so scared that you were gone for good, Izuku. She managed to get out through her sobs. You're all I have left, and I thought that you had. Failing to find the mental fortitude to finish her statement, Izuku's mother settled for squeezing him tighter instead, seemingly desperate to make sure he was really there. She had been drinking to try to wash away her worry. They stood like that for a while, with Izuku comforting his mother as she cried into his shoulder, listening to the occasional rumble of far-off thunder. Izuku could only smile sadly. He felt, well, to put it bluntly, he felt like absolute garbage, making his mother worry so badly. It wasn't that he regretted his decision to go to the lab. He didn't regret that decision. He was going to go back in 3 days after all. Instead, all of his guilt was due to how he worried his mother so much in the process. He should have waited until morning like he was originally going to. That way his mother wouldn't have been put in such a nerve-wracking situation. It was as they say, hindsight is 20/20, but hindsight wasn't helping him in this situation. What he needed to do was simply hug his mom and comfort her. Soon she would get it out of her system, take a step back, wipe her face clean with her sleeve, and start scolding him. It was how it always went. He did something that worried her. She would cry her eyes out, then scold him auntie. I'm sorry. What? I'm so sorry. It was such a quiet thing, it could barely be counted as a whisper. For a moment the teen thought he had imagined it. I don't know what I did, but sniff I'm so sorry Izuku. Mom? This wasn't how it was supposed to go. His mom was supposed to get angry with him, not whatever this was. It's because I didn't support you, isn't it? She sobbed, her voice cracking. It's because I didn't support you trying becoming a hero. I just didn't want you to get hurt, that's all. Izuku had no idea what was going on, let alone what he was supposed to say. I'm sorry, I'll support you, I'll cheer you on no matter what you do, I'll do whatever I can to help you become a hero. Just please. She squeezed him even tighter as she broke down. Please don't leave me again. Oh? The realization hit him like a bombshell. His mom thought he ran away from home. It was why she had been drinking and crying her eyes out, instead of calling the police. Mom, there were so many things he wanted to say. That he didn't run away, that he would never leave her like that she was an amazing mom, that he loved her. But Izuku was never good with words, and couldn't seem to find a good way to fit it all in, so instead he did the next best thing. He hugged her, and let her cry on his shoulder. All while the rain continued to fall outside. Rain of sins. Izuku was annoyed. He wasn't mad, he wasn't angry, he wasn't about to go punch something, he was just annoyed. It had been 3 days since the kid had come to the lab. It had been 3 days since he had people start digging for info on the kid. 3 days of consecutive all-nighters and lost sleep, and it had been 3 days of nothing. Well, it's not exactly nothing. He mused as he glanced at the large stacks of papers sprawled out in front of him. Date of birth, blood type, medical records, school grades, home address, family tree, and much more was right there, presented to him in a nice size 11 caliber font, but it was just, nothing. No criminal record, no instances of delinquency, no instances of him acting out in class, no extracurricular activities, he wasn't a part of any gangs, he didn't attend any political rallies, he had no romantic relationships, it was just so plain. He was so unsuspicious that it was suspicious. The kid didn't even attend any after-school clubs. In fact, the only thing that even made the kid stand out was the fact that he was quirkless. He was quirkless, but was somehow still determined to be a hero despite all the bullying he went through because of it. He had even put UA on his high school recommendation paper. The kid's father died when he was young, and he lived alone in an apartment with his mother who worked multiple jobs to support the both of them. No family pets, no grandparents, no cousins, no extended family of any note, and when Yujiko had listened into the recordings from the tracking chips, all he got was a bunch of crying. He was honestly beginning to wonder how he had thought the kid was a threat in the first place. He wasn't threatening at all, just sad and depressing to look at. And it wasn't sad, as in the feeling you get when you hear some random person died on the car radio, but sad as in the feeling you get when you see an abandoned puppy on the street who was starving, but with no arms or legs. But that wasn't the point. The most threatening part about the kid was the fact he could make you depressed just by telling you his life story. Which kinda played into his favor. Yujiko really didn't feel like killing the kid. It would just be wrong, like kicking an orphan that was drowning and didn't have legs. He really needed better analogies. But that brought him to his current situation. Sitting at his desk with what Yaira had dubbed the Great Tower of Coffee, sitting to his right a stack of well over 20 empty coffee mugs stacked neatly in a tower, threatening to fall on him while he was busy staring at and rereading the monstrous amount of papers in front of him. The biggest problem the kid provided was the fact he could reveal the lab's location. The usual way this type of problem was handled was with a specially designed memory erasing Nomu. It worked like a charm, but the person it was used on, well, the side effects were, their mental state was often, well, he couldn't use it on the kid. Plan B was just to kill whoever it was. It raised police activity, forced the lab crew to lay low until it all blew over, and overall wasn't as good as Plan A again. He didn't feel like killing the kid. Plan C was the backup plan. Good old blackmail. It wasn't nearly as good as Plan A or B, because it didn't actually fix the fact whoever it was could tell someone, it only lessened the risk. Unfortunately, it was Yujiko's only option left unless he wanted to hurt the kid, which as previously stated, was like kicking a puppy. Unfortunately, the things that made the kid so sad and depressing in the first place also meant there was almost nothing to use as blackmail against him. No crimes, no debts, no skeletons in the closet, no nothing. What about money? He wondered to himself. Everyone loves money. The kid could use it to pay bills, get an actual house, buy healthier food, all sorts of things. That would work, right? He stroked his mustache for what seemed to be the 100th time. It helped him think. No, that wouldn't work either. A family suddenly gaining a massive income of money would draw attention, not to mention the fact that I'd have to, sir, eh? Yujiko was pulled from his musing by the lab's head scientist, who was lazily leaning on the doorframe. He told the guards, to tell the security chief, to tell me, to tell you, when the green bean gets here. Green bean? Yair sighed in exasperation. The kid, boss. You wanted to know when the kid got here. And? What do you mean, and? What do you mean, what do I mean? Ugh, she grumbled something about old people under her breath. The kid, boss. The kid is here. Izuku stared at her for a moment, his coffee-fueled brain running overtime, trying to understand what she said, before his eyes widened in surprise. He knew he needed to work fast, but had time really gotten away from him that badly? He scrambled to gather all of his stuff while glancing at his watch, and sure enough wait a moment. What are you talking about? The kid can't be here yet. What do you mean he can't be here yet? Are you going senile or something? I told him to be here at 5 p.m. sharp, I still have half an hour. Izuku nodded to himself as if he just solved life's great mysteries. Hafia, what in the world are you going on about? The clock. He held up his watch. It's only 4:30. Well, what do you want me to do? Wave my hand and magically speed the clock forward half an hour. That's not how my quirk works. That's not how any quirk works. No, I'm saying that no sane person would actively want to come to an underground lab disguised as a creepy old warehouse, he said as he turned his attention back to his papers, let alone come a whole half hour before they're supposed to be there. Well then, congratulations, the kid's not sane. Wait, he glanced back up at her with wide eyes. He's actually here. Yes. Yair practically shouted. The kid is here. Why is that so hard to understand? Well then, why didn't you say something sooner? Izuku thought he heard Yair swear something about goddamn old people, but quickly discarded it, as his sleep-deprived mind playing tricks on him. He grabbed a handful of documents and his coffee mug, before he paused, realized it was empty, and put it back down. Grab the rest. He shouted to Yair as he ran past her. Yair blinked and looked at the desk that was covered in various stacks of paper as big as her head. She leaned her head back against the door frame, and let out a resigned sigh. Guards. A few seconds later, a pair of armed guards sprinted around the corner, guns raised and ready to fight off any threat. Hey guys, Yair smiled. The doc needs all that junk taken to the front. She jabbed her thumb over her shoulder. But miss, thanks so much guys. She gave a lazy wave as she walked away. You all are a huge help. Since it had been an interesting past few days for Izuku. After he had gotten home and had that whole fiasco with his mom, she had passed out on his shoulder after 30 or so minutes crying. He had then taken her to her room and tucked her into her bed, before going to his room and falling asleep. He had honestly expected to wake up and it all to have been some weird dream, Mr. Krugery, the lab, Dr. Yujiko, his mom, all of it. But when he woke up he was still wearing his jacket, still had the crumpled paper in his pocket and his mom. He had brought up what happened twice, once the morning after, and once yesterday. The first time, she broke down sobbing, and the second, when he tried much more gently, she had immediately shushed him and told him not to worry about it. But while this was important, he had bigger things to worry about right now, mainly the large metal door in front of him. His mother had told him at a young age that he should always be a bit early to important things, although I don't think she meant this early. He admitted to himself as he glanced at his phone, which was proudly displaying the fact he wasn't supposed to be here for another half an hour. Maybe I should just go home and then come back at 5. He took a step back, no. Only to stop Almight, a true hero wouldn't get scarred and run away, just because they were a bit early. He took a step forwards, but they wouldn't be half an hour early to begin with. He took a step back, and so this continued for a few minutes before the quirkless boy finally worked up the nerve to knock on the door. This of course wasn't because he had found the courage to face social interaction, but instead because he had found the perfect way to sidestep the entire social problem entirely. I'll knock on the door, and if no one answers I'll just come back later. Truly, it was a genius plan. It allowed him to not have to worry about social interaction at all, unless of course, I can do this. Someone actually opened the door, because then the whole plan went out the window. Just as Izuku raised a shaking fist, the door swung open inward. Standing in the doorway was a young woman in her early 20s. She had light mint green hair that fell down to her lower back, toxic green eyes, and a smirk plastered on her face. She wore a lab coat, custom tailored to be longer than usual, hanging down to her ankles, blue jeans, black shoes, and a light blue armband, signifying her as a person of authority. Well, looky here, it's the green bean everyone's been talking about. Izuku stuttered like a broken record, the situation having him frozen in place. His anxiety wasn't helped when the woman started to snicker at his attempts at communication. Sheesh kid, you shaking worse than a leaf, you catch a cold or something. No, I'm not sick. Relax kid, she waved her hand in a dismissive motion. I'm messing with you, it's called sarcasm, you should try it sometime. Oh, well sorry. She raised an eyebrow in curiosity, before shrugging and stepping aside. Whatever, the boss wants to see you, whether that's a good or bad thing is still up for debate. The bad thing, Izuku recoiled. She sighed and brought her palm to her face. Sarcasm kid. She gave him a blank stare through her fingers. Sarcasm. Oh, Izuku relaxed slightly, right, sarcasm. He gulped as he took a few hesitant steps past the lab hat and into the building. He gulped again as he noticed the 4 armed guards on either side of the door, and gulped a third time when the lady closed the door behind him, locking it with an audible click. Hope you don't mind me being the one to greet you, she said as she started walking him deeper into the facility. The boss man is busy, and I figured you wouldn't want a group of guards showing you in. She glanced over her shoulder at the squad of guards following them and winced. You would want someone other than just a group of guards showing you in, right? Izuku stammered. The two descended into an awkward silence, mainly due to Izuku's lack of communication skills, performing a team-up move with his nervousness around the female gender, to render him incapable of speech. Suo, the lady drawled in an attempt to break the silence. What's your name? Izuku Midoriya, he stuttered. What's yours? You want to know my name? She gasped as she pulled her arms protectively in front of her chest. How bold. Much more distressing to Izuku was that this had the unfortunate side effect of exemplifying her feminine assets. Sorry. She went from shock to trying to hold in her laughter, as Izuku found a sudden interest in the floor, and turned red as a cherry in record-breaking time. I'm just messing with you, kid, she chuckled at him. The name's Yair Ito, and you better remember it. She smirked. And speaking of things to remember, here we are. Yair exclaimed, bringing their march through the stale white hallways to a close. Drawing his attention back in front of him, Izuku couldn't help but gulp nervously. In front of Izuku stood a very intimidating door. It towered over them, by a foot at most. It was a very vile shade of steel gray. It moved by itself, upward because it was an automatic sliding door. Okay, look, just because it looked literally just like every other door in the building, doesn't mean it couldn't be intimidating. Just ignore the fact that everything was intimidating to him right about now. They're leading me to whatever's behind this door. He stressed. Is it Dr. Yujiko? Is he angry at me? Am I in trouble? Did I? Oblivious to Izuku's inner turmoil, Yair gave a quick flick of her ID across a panel to the door's left, breaking Izuku out of his thoughts with a hydraulic hiss as it slid upward. Izuku gulped as he nervously looked inside. It was a moderately sized room, only about 100 or so square feet, completely empty except for a desk and its accompanying chair in the center. But it being so empty also had the side effect of making the room seem much larger than it was, or maybe that was just Izuku being Izuku. What are you waiting for? The mailman. A hot date. A good luck card. Go on in. Oh, sorry. The green-haired boy nervously glanced around as he entered the room, but he couldn't see anything else of note. She said to go in, but is this the right room? Am I supposed to meet someone? Am I supposed to be waiting for something? Is there something Whump. If you asked Izuku later, he would tell you that he most certainly did not jump and yelp like a girl when the door closed behind him, no matter what story, Rita's gossip, Yair told in the break room. Face burning red from embarrassment, Izuku smoothed out his shirt from the jump that he most certainly did not take, and walked towards the desk. As he got closer, he noticed that the desk had a large drawer built into it, and that, more importantly, it was open by a few inches. Being the very responsible teen he was, Izuku did what any responsible person would do. Stand next to the desk for a few awkward seconds before giving in, and taking a peek inside. Inside, in organized lines, were 3 pens, 3 pencils, 3 mechanical pencils, a small stack of notebook paper, and a thick stack of neatly printed paper with a sticky note labeled for Mr. Midoriya. Pulling the stack out for a closer look, Izuku was surprised to find it was some kind of written test. His brows furrowed as he flipped through the stack. If it wasn't already obvious, then this proved that this wasn't anything like the tests he took regularly in school. It had well over 300 questions, most of which were free response, and was clearly divided into different sections, each covering a different subject. It was biology, genetics, quirkology, an entire part dedicated to human anatomy, and chemistry. Izuku winced as he read that last one. He hadn't studied for any form of test, but due to his research, he was reasonably confident in his knowledge on the other sections. And since that research hadn't involved anything even remotely related to chemistry, when he got to the back, however, his frown faded. An almost completely empty page greeted him, with 10 blank pages for work following it. On the page there were 2 things. An open-ended question was at the top, and right next to it in cursive handwriting. Don't nuts, kid, we're scientists. We understand a lot more than your middle school teacher, Dr. Yujiko. Izuku couldn't help but smile at the jab at his biology teacher. I must have rambled about it last time I was here, he reasoned as he flipped back to the front of the papers, taking a moment to collect himself and take a deep breath before beginning to work. And as he started on the first question, he was mulling over the final open-ended question in the back of his mind. Hugh, what do you think a quirk is? Since Dr. Yujiko sat comfortably in his chair located in the center of a temporarily repurposed surveillance room. While the monitor-filled room was normally staffed by a team of 15 or so guards, with all the screens displaying camera feeds, local hero activity, police patrols, and such. Today, it was full of almost 20 or so of his top scientists, and the screens were displaying fast-moving data instead of reports or camera feeds, well, all except for one. The giant screen that took up the entirety of the northern wall was displaying a live feed of a person of very high interest, Izuku Midoriya. Yair, he started without looking up. Why were you at the entrance with the guard team? Meh, no real reason, she shrugged while walking through the door. I just wanted to see the kid myself, find out what everyone's been talking about. What do you mean? Boss, you're kidding, right? She stared at him. How have you not heard any of the stuff people are saying? It's like, she gestured weakly, the only thing anyone's been talking about for the last few days. I swear, I can't even wash my hands without someone asking me is a true kid got in. Or would they let him leave? Or even, and you're gonna love this one boss, they asked if the kid was yours. Seriously? Yes, seriously. The lab head huffed as she slumped into the chair next to him. It's like they expect me to know everything that happens here just because I'm the lab head. Yeah, he gave a sideways glance at her. I put you in charge of both this facility and the research conducted here. The security chief reports to you, the research teams report to you. You have access to the entire building's surveillance system, which I know you watch in your free time for your gossip. He quickly stated, cutting off her rebuttal. And the only person of higher authority in the building is me whenever I stop by. For all intents and purposes, you do know everything that happens. But boss, now be quiet, I'm busy. He turned his attention back to the screens in front of him, ignoring how one of the top minds he currently had employed crossed her arms, huffed, and pouted like a teenager. The test he had given the kid was difficult, so difficult that it straddled the line between stress hair graying and actually impossible, as if it were walking a tightrope. He should know, he had made it himself. It was made to be hard enough that it made someone's brain work overtime, but not hard enough to make them completely give up, and it was made that way for a very specific reason. It created the prime environment to monitor someone's brain activity. But Izuku would be a fool if he just used this opportunity to monitor that. Brainwave activity, heart rate, facial expressions, body language, and even things as simple as which hand he wrote with. Everything was recorded, analyzed, and cataloged. The test itself was just another way to gather info, the most obvious of which was the entire front page, which was a survey page. It asked for mundane things such as your full name, initials, and age, as well as very specific things, such as levels of education, jobs worked, social status, medical issues, past crimes, enemies, etc. These questions weren't much themselves, but with his brain activity monitored, not to mention the plethora of Nomu in the room adjacent to him, all with specialized purposes such as being a perfect lie detector, the real gems would come from what he either lied about, or didn't feel like answering. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. It went all the way down to the writing utensil the kid picked and how he used it. A recent survey showed kids that most children in Japan use mechanical pencils. However, when you broke that up into school regions, the high-end private school had the highest use of pens, usually custom-made. The middle-class public schools tended to use mechanical pencils the most, and the poor schools in the run-down parts of cities use almost exclusively wooden pencils the schools provided. He would subconsciously gravitate to whichever felt more familiar to him, and how he wrote was just as important as what he wrote with. For example, high-class children were taught to hold pens a certain way, and were schooled on their handwriting. Everyone can lie about where they're from, but the things you're taught as a child are ingrained into your subconscious, are much harder to cover up. Professional agents have to go through years of training to achieve their expertise, years of training that the kid most certainly didn't have. One way or another, Izuku would have all the information he needed to decide on what to do with the kid. All they had to do now was wait. Heinous sins. Can I just hand this whole thing off to my secretary? No, I don't have one. How about whoever's second in command of the lab, would that work? Wait, that would be IR, and as such, an all-around bad idea. She'd just do something stupid to annoy me, like dress him up as a maid and hire him to hand her things, so she doesn't have to get out of her chair. Izuku sighed as he took another sip of coffee, trying to kickstart his brain. The kid had finished the test about half an hour ago, and even though the test was a sham and there was no real reason to grade it, Izuku had handed it off to a few of his scientists to do so anyway. He was curious, okay. He had honestly expected for something to slip, for one of the brain activity monitors to show the kid had been lying, or for the DNA test they ran on the strand of the kid's hair, to show he was related to someone of note, something that let him get rid of the kid with a clear conscience, because he did have a conscience. He was a scientist, not a killer, and while his master was the latter on occasions and Izuku's morals had slipped a bit over time, the doctor had sworn to follow him as a man of science, not a man who killed innocent children. All for One was the one responsible for the bodies and other less savory paints he used to create his artwork. All Izuku did was provide his finished creations to his master. His conscience started and ended with his work, where and how his master got him his supplies or what he decided to use the finished product for, wasn't on Izuku's conscience. But the kid's life was. And despite his numerous attempts to get it off, he couldn't. He was a kid who had been put down his entire life for something he believed in, but despite this he continued to believe in it, even when no one believed in him. And that hit a little too close to home. The doctor was currently leaning against the wall of the break room. He was still peeved about how they spent the time to put a TV up before they finished the security system, and watched the interaction between his most annoying lab hat and his most annoying headache. After the kid finished the test, Yair dragged him to the break room, hell-bent on interrogating the kid for gossip, and the such, and Izuku had been compelled to tag along. Stupid morals. And of course, his life being his life, almost immediately after the two sat down, their conversation had drifted to things that made the kid such a hard spot to wipe off his conscience in the first place. I know that it may seem impossible, and I know it'll be extremely difficult, but Izuku looked the lab hat straight in the eye. I refuse to give up. Look, Green, that's admirable and all, Yair consoled, but you have no idea if it's even feasible. Couldn't you at least take the time to make a backup plan for if that falls through? Yujiko, deciding to give his mind a break from his moral dilemma, pulled his head up and looked at both of them. Yair was on the edge of the couch, her head resting on her fist, which was supported by her arm, which in turn rested on the armrest. She was smiling, but her hand was rubbing the bottom of her lab coat, an unconscious action which she had learned meant she was nervous, and judging by her tone of voice, sympathetic, caring, and worried. He concluded with a slight hum, the kid's growing on her, although from both of their profiles, it's not too surprising. He's shy, but naturally draws people to him, and Yair, his mouth into a line. He's reminding her of her little brother. Ichiko filed that away for later, and turned to Izuku. The aspiring hero was sitting perfectly straight in a chair directly across from the couch, his hands here gripping his knees, and his eyes. Determination. Yujiko sighed as he closed his eyes. The kid's got nothing but determination, the kind that doesn't listen to logic or reason. This argument isn't ending until Yair gives up. I understand what you're saying, and I know you only mean good, but I can't do that. But why not? The lab had pleaded. I'm not saying to give up trying to be the first quirkless hero. I'm saying just to have something to fall back on if something happens that you can't control. I can't do that. But why not? Because. He gripped his jeans. If I do that, then I'd be admitting that there's a chance I might fail, and I don't have that kind of luxury. If I want to succeed, then I need to put 100% of myself into trying. His eyes steeled. I can't allow myself any doubt. Ichiko's attention was drawn to the opening of the door, though the two green-haired occupants were too caught up in their argument to notice. Through the door slipped a scientist carrying a stack of papers. He made his way to Ichiko, the doctor meeting him halfway, and handed over the now graded test. The test, due to not being intended to actually be graded, didn't have a grade on the front or any form of score. What it did have, however, was a top-of-the-line scientist's opinion on whether or not the kid got the answer right, giving a quick explanation for why he was wrong, or why he wasn't entirely right, when they had to. The benefit of this was that it wasn't as black and white as right or wrong. There were several questions that the kid had gotten mostly right, but was missing a few details he wouldn't have known, unless he decided to major in certain fields. Ha, not half bad, kid. He mused, there's a lot less red than I thought there'd be. Wonder where he put it all, he sarcastically joked before wincing as he passed by the chemistry section. Ah, there it is. But all joking aside, Yujiko was honestly surprised. He had expected the kid, a junior high student, to completely bomb it, to have missed the questions so wildly that his scientists would laugh at them. Instead, the kid once again went above and beyond. Now it wasn't perfect by any means, not even close, but if the tests were scored by normal standards, Yujiko would wager the kid would be passing. He was impressed. And that was a difficult feat to accomplish. Turning to the last page, he stopped dead in his tracks. He had put, what do you think a quirk is? As a way to make the kid really think, really get his brain working to get good readings, and he had expected the kid to go overboard on the question, but this, the scientist could only run his fingers over the page now, ignoring the rising shouting of Izuku and Yair. For a brief moment Yujiko had thought his men had gotten a group of his own notes mixed in with the batch. There was a huge gap in ability between someone who had no experience with the subject when compared to someone who at least had the basic ideas behind it down. When put up against one another, the one with the basic understanding would win almost 100% of the time. Now compare that to two people who both knew what they were doing, but one was more experienced than the other by a year or two. The more experienced one would be more likely to win, but there's still a reasonable chance that the underdog could come out on top. There are entire movies based off the fact. There's this massive jump in ability when you learn the basics of something, but then everything afterwards is incremental. You can become more skilled by going up incrementally than you ever did from your original jump, but you'll never have a comparable jump in ability like that again. At least most people won't. There was a second jump that came when you thoroughly understood something. Not many people were able to reach this depth of understanding, but it's what sets the Albert Einsteins apart from the rest of the pack. And when you reach this level of understanding, you're able to use what you know to predict what you don't. To dumb this down, it's like if you wanted to know where a ball came from, normally you would just have to guess. But if you know how it got there, if you knew it fell from somewhere, you can make an educated guess instead of a random one. In this case, that the ball came from the roof. The grin spread across the doctor's face as he read through the paper. The kid didn't know everything, and several of his hypotheses had holes in them, but Yujiko could just tell, the kid could make that second jump. And the proof was the large red question mark the grader had put in the middle of the page. It was at that moment that Yujiko had a realization, the same realization All for One had with Tomura all those years ago. The kid's rough around the edges, the doctor conceded. He doesn't have all the education and specialization that I usually look for, but that doesn't matter. Things were clicking into place in the mad scientist's mind. Those can be provided in time. No, the kid has something much more valuable. His smile warped and his eyes darkened. He has the potential to be more than anyone else could ever be, and even better. It doesn't matter how many times I get knocked down. I'll always get up and try again. Izuku's emotional outburst deafened the room, his argument with Yair reaching its explosive conclusion. He has passion. A chuckle cut through the stunned silence like a metaphorical pen drop. Fuho, Mr. Yujiko. Boss. They both looked at him, bewildered. Oh great, Yair mumbled. You broke him. Mr. Yuji, yes. WHWHWHWA. Izuku recoiled. Yes. The mad scientist declared. That right there. He pointed at Izuku. That was the perfect answer. It was. Yes. The doctor exclaimed as he approached Izuku. Never, give up on your passions. Yes. He looked Izuku directly in the eyes, his grin feral. You have what it takes, you will be my greatest masterpiece. Haha. He laughed, the shadows highlighting his Cheshire grin in all the wrong ways. You are to be my successor. What, boss? Quick. The mad doctor shouted, ignoring their protests. We haven't a moment to lose. We must start getting you up to task immediately. He began to run off before slapping his forehead and stopping to pull out his phone. I need to make calls. I need to get my other lab heads here to tutor you. Extras. No wait. It's much more efficient to learn hands-on and through experience but then you wouldn't learn the theoretical side of things in as much detail. Wait. Yair. He yelled, pointing at the woman who could be confused with an L, with how white her eyes were. This lab is the closest to where my successor lives. You are to provide tutelage when I'm not here, and allow him to watch and help with your research department's work. The doctor began to pace back and forth, his mind going a mile an hour. Excuse me. Oh, there's so much to do. Not to mention this lab isn't even fully set up yet, and that won't do. My successor must have access to the highest end of resources. I'll have to get a construction team out here ASAP too. Excuse me. Ichiko stopped, blinked, and turned to his newly named successor. What W? Spit it out, kid. Yujiko barked, still grinning madly. No successor of mine stutters. It wastes time that would be better spent sharing hypotheses of research. Dr. Yujiko, what did I just say, kid? Izuku took a deep breath and steadied himself. What's going on? Well, isn't it obvious, my boy? Yujiko grinned. You've impressed me, and I'm making you my successor. But sir, I can't. What? Yujiko blinked, taking a moment to process what he just heard. What? Why not? I'm honored, sir, but I can't give up on my dream of UA, and besides, the boy looked down dejectedly. No? You can't be a hero without a quirk. I don't have a quirk. He clenched his fists as Almight's words came back to him. I don't have an intelligence quirk. I can't make myself learn things at an accelerated rate, or multiply my IQ by drinking tea. So I'm sorry, sir. He closed his eyes as he finally accepted what he'd refused to for so long, but I don't have a quirk. And he never would. A pregnant pause filled the air, Izuku waiting for Yujiko's reaction with his eyes clenched shut, and Yair staring wide-eyed at the two, trying to understand what happened in the last 30 seconds. I really am a Deku, aren't I? Izuku half-heartedly chastised himself. I know I can't do anything without a quirk, but I'm still going to try for you. Izuku felt sad weight settle in his stomach, while a much larger one slipped from his shoulders, as he brought himself to accept his situation. He would never truly be anything without a quirk, but at the same time, he refused to give up on his dream. Two unchangeable realities that would forever butt heads, and forever hinder him. For Christ's sake, he was only 16, and look how much their clash should messed up his life so far. So, I'm sorry sir, he restated and bowed his head, but I'm quirkless. A sad smile graced his face. He wasn't happy with his new realization, but finally accepting it brought him a calming sense of peace. So? Only for Yujiko's reply to shatter said peace. What do you mean? Izuku frantically questioned. I mean, does that really matter? Well, of course it matters. Ha! The quirkless kid wants to be a hero. What a joke. Everyone is born with a quirk, a power that makes them unique and strong. Listen nerd, I'm the only one from this school who's hero material. You got that? I was born without one, and because of this no one would believe in me. I'm so sorry sweetie, but if everyone else is naturally born with a huge advantage over me, are they wrong to not believe in me? Are they wrong when they say that I'll never be as strong as someone with a quirk? No. The quirkless person can't be a hero. The quirkless person can't be anything he finished in his head. So that's it, huh? Yujiko questioned. Izuku gulped and braced himself. You can't accept it because no one believes in you. Why no I? Well, that's an easy fix. Using the fact Izuku's bow made Yujiko the taller one, he ruffled the kid's hair. I believe in you. See? Easy fix. Now be my successor. Izuku had only met Dr. Yujiko a few days ago. The man was still a relative stranger, so hearing him say that he believed in him shouldn't mess with him so much. But I believe in you too, Gryakider boss. Yair chimed in. Her shot mental capacity going Yujiko equals boss. Green equals Yujiko's successor equals future boss equals need good impression. Eyes, Izuku stuttered, blinking away tears. And besides, Yujiko continued, his grin still in place. Who cares if you have a quirk? I mean really, quirks are meaningless when talking about potential. What do you mean, sir? Izuku snorted as he wiped his sleeve across his face. What do I mean? What do I mean? Haha. Izuku threw the stack of papers up in the air, the binding coming undone, and causing it to fall like leaves around them. I'm talking about your question, my boy, he exclaimed. What are quirks? Young Mr. Midoriya, do you know why it doesn't matter if you have a quirk? It's because quirks don't measure what you can or can't do. Izuku felt his chest tighten. It's because quirks don't determine your destiny. He felt his eyes water. It's because what quirk you're born with doesn't determine anything. He felt his hope, beaten and battered as it was, find a small spark. It's because what quirks are, all quirks truly are, is clay. Ha ha ha. Izuku cackled at the heavens. Quirks are nothing more than clay that we scientists must shape to create our art. And so began a story that was never meant to be, a fable that would forever leave its mark on history. A tale of pain, struggles, hardship, growth, redemption, and loss. Say it was fate, say it was luck, say the powers that be had given a hopeless boy the chance he never had, or that it was simply wrong place, wrong time. It doesn't matter how it started, only that it did. And now the world would be forever changed. And it wasn't prepared. Rainous sins. Sir Night Eye's eyes bolted open as he gave out a startled gasp. Taking a moment to compose himself and steady his breathing, he tried to gather his thoughts. Sir? Are you alright? The pro-hero glanced up at Mario Tagata, the hero in training he had agreed to spar with after nearly a week of pestering. Yes, I'm fine. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to postpone this until tomorrow, he replied, running a hand through his hair as his memory came back to him. What? But sir, we haven't even started. Yes, I know, but I just remembered I need to make a call. But sir... Leaving the boy behind in the training room, Night Eye pushed his way out the door and through the hallway, not stopping until he reached his office. He then promptly locked the door and slumped into his chair. Miro had been pestering him for a true spar for well over a month now, and he had finally relented. He was planning on going all out to show the boy how far he had to go, inspiring his drive to improve, while stomping out any overconfidence that might have started forming at the same time. That had been the plan. It hadn't lasted very long. The pro had used foresight on Mario the moment the fight began, having patted him on the back right before to meet the requirements. He was going to use it to look into the future for the next hour to predict all the boy's moves. But he hadn't gotten just the hour glimpse he had been expecting. The hero pinched the bridge of his nose as he recalled his vision. A stadium made of solid stone melting, grotesque creatures with exposed brains, marched alongside fallen angels with faces of skulls, raindrops as thick as sludge, and as black as oil rained from the heavens, and in the center of it all stood a man. His arms were spread lazily into the air, and his face was turned towards the sky, simply enjoying the moment. It was clear, too clear. His visions of the far future were always snippets, brief moments in time with a hazy foam surrounding them. But this was different. He had not only received visual feedback, but audio as well. Night Eye sighed as he fished his phone out of his pocket. He had several calls to make. And as the phone rang, the words of the man rang in head. Revenge. You could call this revenge. You could also call me a villain. But this is so much more. This is justice, and I am the rain that has come to wash away the sins of the world, even if I must purge it in fire to do so. Thanks for watching, you beautiful people. If you enjoyed, like, share and sub. You can check other what ifs on the channel. I'll see you around.